Deliberation of the deliberation of a negotiated contract for a prospective gift to the district, deliberation about commercial or financial information that the board has received from a business prospect, or deliberation of the offer of a financial or other incentive to a business prospect, and/or to consult with legal counsel regarding pending or contemplated litigation or a similar offer, or on a matter which the school district's legal counsel determines should be confidential in accordance with Chapter 551 of the Texas Government Code, Sections 551.074, 551.072, 551.073, 551.087, and 551.071, respectively. Do you have a motion to approve the agenda?
Move approval.
Is there a second? Second. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Passes unanimously by those present. All right.
Do the pledge.
Ms. Moya, will you lead us in the pledge?
Yes.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
The board will now move to closed session.
At 6:50, we have 5, so we can go. Thank you very much. We've got several items tonight, all of which are substantive in nature. Hopefully, we can be efficient this evening. Dr. Struffin, do you have a preference on the sequence in which you'd like to tackle? Because we've got 5 items. We can take them in whatever order you guys would like. Actually, 6.
She's okay. Yeah, Mr. President, trustees of the board, we're fine. We can get started in the order we have, and preferably allowing our chief financial officer to be able to leave on time.
Okay. So the first item we have is the presentation of the recommended fiscal 13 expenditure budget. And Dr. Struffin.
Mr. President, trustees, tonight our Chief Financial Officer and I will provide you a quick summary of the presentation of the fiscal year 13 recommended expenditure budget. Subsequent opportunities to discuss the budget and related items will occur on June 18th and August 2nd. Adoption of the budget and tax rate is scheduled for August 27th. State law requires school budgets to be approved no later than August 31st. And just as a reminder to everyone, for next school year, because Monday is the first day of school and we would have had our regularly scheduled meeting, the 27th is actually a Tuesday. So please, prepare accordingly if you want to be there for that budget meeting on the agenda. At the May 7th work session, the board continued its discussion on the consideration of a tax ratification election for either 2012 or 13, but to ensure that programming is in place for next school year, the board actually agreed that you would take action this month in June at the June 18th meeting, so that it was a tentative approval of the proposed expenditure budget to ensure that we were able to open the school year on time. The recommended budget includes an allotment to provide the equivalent of a 3% increase for all staff for 1 year only at the cost of approximately $14.2 million. This one-time payment would be funded out of the district reserves. If the board decides to hold a tax ratification election in November 2012 and the voters approve a tax increase, this one-time payment could become a permanent salary increase for all employees. Again, it's all about the timing. If there's no TRE in November 2012, in order to continue the one-time increase for an additional year, another $14.6 million would need to be drawn from the district's fund balance in fiscal year 2014, making the fund balance total of 28.8. Now, while the district's reserve levels are strong, we're currently projecting that these one-time salary increases could be covered, but again, it still does not quite, we can't quite plan with any certainty what would happen in the legislative session. So what we're proposing tonight is the one-time salary increase and having to take the rest one step at a time. I'm going to turn it over to Nicole Conley-Abram, who will refresh your memory on all the details, and then we'll leave it to the board to ask any questions. Are you ready, Ms. Abram?
Yes,
Okay.
we're just getting the presentation up.
Can you, while y'all are pulling that up, I just want to direct the board's attention to the attached documents behind, your tab 1 is what we actually call the budget book. And so I encourage everyone in the community to look at it, to read it word for word, because you will actually really get a deeper understanding of the AISD budget. And then after her presentation, which is on the PowerPoint, behind tab 3, we have the salary comparisons. You can look on behind tab 3 in 2, all of the, I guess you could say like principal salaries and assistant principal salaries. We just provided, a lot of details about AISD and its comparison to other FAST districts. And Michael Hauser is here if you'd like to have some of those questions answered. And then we ran the 12-13 salary increases, or potential projected, for some of the surrounding districts as we've been reading the newspaper and trying to keep up on those. That's behind tab 4. And then just as a reminder, we've been answering other questions, which is tied to your other agenda item in the continuation of the consideration of a tax ratification election. But you should have seen since the last meeting with your questions, as we have more and more answers, we've been providing them to you in your weekly update. Nicole Conley-Abram, are you ready?
Nicole, let me mention before that, Mr. Guzman had an emergency situation at camp this evening, so he will not be able to join us. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Nicole Conley-Abram, CFO for Austin ISD. I'm joined here by my compadre, Chief Human Capital Officer, Mr. Michael Hauser. So tonight we're presenting the details of the FY 2013 recommended expenditure budget. So if you recall, the last time we met in May, while we still are sort of debating and sort of deliberating on the actual tax rate that's going to be finalized, we decided to postpone our budget adoption that was originally scheduled for June until August. And so at this time, we're presenting an expenditure budget for board approval for the June 18th meeting so that we can move forward and implement programmatic actions to be in line and ready to start when school opening takes place. So as many of you know, this is an iterative process. We've evolved since we first presented the preliminary budget. We had both engaging community and staff meetings. We collected feedback. We represented the budget with the revised budget that you all reviewed, and now we're sort of finalizing budgetary actions with the recommended budget, which hasn't changed substantially since we submitted the revised budget. We've been sort of in detail expended some time already going through some of these programmatic options, which is why I'll be brief in my comments tonight. Again, so the recommended budget totals $982.1 million, which includes the general food and debt service funds. It represents an increase of about $7.87 million, which is almost 0.8% and increase over last year's adopted levels. That increase is primarily attributable to the increase in our debt service requirements. You can see our debt requirements going up about $6.8 million. The net increase to the general fund is just about $106,000, and food service fund just under $1 million. Again, the expenditures that assumed in the recommended expenditure budget haven't changed since we represented the revised budget. We're still assuming about a 612 increase in students. We've built in capacity to support the new early childhood center, the Up-House Early Childhood Center that will open, about $2.98 million approved for the implementation of the annual academic facilities options, AFRs, supports continuing costs, about $2.3 million for those continuing strategic plan initiatives that were either previously funded by grant dollars that are primarily going away, and we had to restore that funding. New strategic plan investments of about $1.5 million, about $9.87 million in increases in baseline funding, $2.4 million in contractually required or statutorily required options, and then, as Dr. Christopher already spoke, it includes $14.2 million to support one-time payment allotments to employees to provide the equivalent of a 3% increase. Our general fund, once all is represented, is about 74% of the overall funds, with recapture representing about 4%. We're still sort of carrying the same revenue assumptions that we were holding when we represented the revised budget in April. We won't make any adjustments to our revenue assumptions until we get the final certified appraisal values from the chief, Travis County Appraisal District, the chief there. And so that won't be until the end of July. So by law, statutorily, the chief appraiser has until the end of July to certify our property values. So we're utilizing the preliminary assumptions that were provided in April. So the net revenue, our total revenue is expected to go down about $27.8 million, which represents about a 3.5% decline in our expected revenue. When you sort of factor out the fact that a recapture, which is going to go down about $20.7 million, that's basically effectuation of how the methodology that the state is using to appropriate the cuts this year. So last year, in order to implement the cuts, we saw our WADA decrease dramatically. So this year, they're sort of restoring WADA to normal levels, and they're making the cuts elsewhere. So you'll just see a direct reduction in our statewide revenue. So because of that change, our recapture is going to go down in some regards. So the net loss to the district in terms of operating revenue to implement programmatic initiatives is about close to $8 million, or 1.1% decline in revenue to the district to maintain its operating needs. So the total expenditures net of recapture, again, are about $20.9 million, or 3% is the change, and primarily as a result of the one-time cost that we built into the budget to support the equivalent of the 3%. So I just want to briefly mention that the proposed sort of program changes and budgetary increases are steeped and closely aligned to the board priorities that were set in November for FY13 that support our drive towards college, career, and life readiness. And so all of the investment options have been closely aligned to these priorities, which include whole child, every child, developing a college-ready culture, establishing a rich portfolio of options, and then strengthening our human capital systems and our basic core fundamentals systems. The net effect of the actual proposed increases in the FY13 expenditure budget means that we're probably going to have to make a potential draw on our reserves of about $29.5 million. Which will ultimately result in what we're projecting of about a $176.7 million unassigned fund balance reserve at the end of fiscal year 13. So the $176.7 million is above our board policy that requires us that we maintain 14% of our expenditures in unassigned fund balance. However, it's still below the 2.5 operating months that required, or that the measures by the state has sort of set for optimal levels. The 176 is still above the about $148.3 million that we maintained in 2010 when we first became AAA. I've already had our presentations this year to our rating agencies. And we feel confident that the one-time draw won't affect our ratings since we do have a multi-year financial plan and they've been briefed and they're aware of. So they understand the need and the necessity to go into our reserves next year, and they understand some of our planning efforts around trying to find continuity for the programmatic and the increases that we would need to sustain those salary increases in the out years. And so as for us, it's important that we have a continued story with our rating agencies. Unlike other school districts, Austin ISD, we're still one of the only ones with a commercial paper, which means that we're reviewed every year by the rating agencies, while others only are reviewed when they go out for and issue their main their general obligation bonds. And so for some school districts, that could be as far and few between as every 4 or 5 years. So for us, it's an annual process, so they're well aware and been briefed on our multi-year planning efforts. So if you look at the out years, looking at our FY13 recommended budget and assuming that we did not put in no interventions to sort of maintain or avert spending, and if we just extrapolated the similar assumptions that we use in revenue, you can see our fund balance sort of being depleted over time and upwards of close to $40 million in FY 2015. So you see the need in 2014 to really go in and sort of be able to obtain some stability in our revenue so that we can offset that. Otherwise, you'll see our reserve levels going down to levels of about $111.5 million respectively if we did nothing and did not take any action to sort of obtain additional revenue in those out years. So at this time, I'm going to actually hand it over to Michael Hauser to talk a little bit about our implementation plan around our compensation strategy as well as our health strategy.
And I can go ahead and move pretty quickly through that. There's compensation that we want to talk about just for a moment today. That's the salary and then also the issue of the health insurance. And the one thing I would like for you to be aware of is that Nicole works with us really well at the table with AAPSA and with Education Austin. So what we're bringing to you tonight has been vetted with those two entities, and they support what we're bringing this evening. So you can see, first of all, we've talked about the salary, the one-time 3% or the equivalent of a 3% per employee. That's the value that we'd like to lean toward. You will find that in most cases throughout our competitive efforts in the nearby vicinity that we're falling behind each year. This year, we're hearing that Round Rock and others are looking at 2 to 3%. So every time we try to move, they move too. So it's a constant game of catch-up. But we are moving in that direction. You will notice on the slide that talks about a little bit about the allotment itself and moving forward. We would have a payment cycle, if you all agree, on next Monday that could begin as early as August. And what we would do is we'd put monthly payments into the person's paycheck so that it would be pensionable and it would count toward TRS. So while it would be considered not a permanent raise for the base salary, we have checked with TRS and they have told us that as long as we make the payments as usual and as customary as possible, that it could be considered part of income and it would be considered pensionable, which has been very well received by our employee groups. The other thing that we wanted to bring to your attention today is health insurance. It continues to be a big issue for us. Nicole has done a great job of putting us on the self-insured side of this issue, but we're finding that it constantly needs to be tweaked because we're finding that this is something that obviously that we do a large investment within. You will find that we put together a 2-year agreement with Education Austin that would be coming to you. Next week, we also have the same agreement with AAPSA. And what that does for us, it sets us up very nicely. There are 3 insurance plans that are normally offered. You will find this next year, it will be somewhat business as usual, but we are moving toward if a person wants to buy up to a policy, that they will pay the full difference between what would be considered the standard offering and buying up to the premium. So we're going to be able to contain some of our insurance costs, but if you will look at page 15 slide that shows you what we're investing in insurance, you will notice that we're still paying $413.19, which is still higher than most districts. What we need to do is we need to make sure that we begin to move toward a long-term plan. The long-term plan that will help us really will be in year 13, 14. And what you will find once again is that we will go from 3 offerings to 2 offerings. We will have the buy-up for the individual that wants to purchase something that's extraordinary with insurance, and the standard plan will still be better than most districts are offering. So we're moving in a good direction. Education Austin and the AAPSA have been good partners with us as we've crafted those two pieces. So we are looking forward to perhaps some opportunities in August to enhance the salaries that would at least be pensionable, and we're looking forward to doing something that would give us a nice, solid future with insurance. Nicole?
And if I could just briefly speak to the historical exemptions, the board will take action on the 18th. One, to both modify the current existing exemption program to mirror that or closely mirror to that that the cities has implemented by instituting a cap for those historic properties that are either designated or that change ownership after December 31st, 2011. It would effectively apply a maximum exemption of about $3,500 for the exemption itself. The other the other tiered system that was in place previous to this action would remain for those properties and when those effective actions were taken during those time periods. And so what we'd be implementing is somewhat of a three-tiered system, which with grandfathering at the old, the prior properties that existed, depending upon when the action was actually officiated by the board. So this closely mirrors the city's plan. The city's program basically caps the program at $2,500. The $3,500 is recommended for AISD as it is the analysis behind what the actual average exemption, considering the fact that we are the largest apportionment of the tax bill, or about 58% of the tax bill. So this, our average exemption was around $3,500. And then lastly, I just wanted the board to just remind the public and the board of the actions that are going to take place over the next few months that would sort of finalize the FY 2013 budget and adoption. Again, for June 18, we're going to approve the expenditure budget. It says June 11th, but the actual action is on June 18. Where we will, the board is scheduled to take action to approve the expenditure budget, the ordinance modifying the historic landmark property exemption program, and also approving an ordinance approving for partial exemptions, and then give final guidance on moving forward with a possible tax rate election for either 2012 or 2013. On August 6th, the board is scheduled to take action to approve both the publication and the date of the hearing for the budget and tax rate so that we may publicize that, and then finally adopt the budget on August, actually 28th has been changed to, and adopt the budget, the tax rate, hold the public hearing, and the ordinances that would basically effectively implement the tax rate. And just so some of our financial planning actions going forward. We're actually moving through the process of closing out the financial close process starting in the beginning of, we actually started at the beginning of this month in June. We're obviously trying to maximize our reserve levels. We're continuing, this year we continue to implement many of our spending controls and exception hiring so that we can sort of build our reserves to levels where we can implement the actual one-time payment as well as mitigate future state cuts. We're looking to secure a $30 million in external resources over the next 3 years to support our strategic plan priorities, and we'll continue on moving down the path of educating stakeholders on possible TREs and improve and continue to build on our efforts to coordinate with other taxing jurisdictions in terms of planning for tax rates. And that concludes my presentation, and I'll take any questions that you have at this time.
Okay, thank you, both of y'all. Very fine budget book presentation and the book itself. Just want to clarify, you know, the next agenda item, board, is the discussion of the tax ratification election, but it's sort of embedded in this a little bit because the presumption in the numbers here is that there's not a tax ratification election, and that would adjust the revenue side, which is really what the administration, I think, is looking for, is for us to decide on the expenditure side so that campus level planning and district planning can be done, and that the decision on the revenue side of the thing, basically the tax rate, will potentially be deferred to August unless we can make a decision in the next week to give direction about which way we want to go. But either way, we can't actually set the tax rate until August. So we can continue to have that discussion, but I think what they're looking for most immediately is feedback on the expenditure side of the budget, but also anything else. So let's open it up for comments or questions. Ms. Torres?
Really, this question is for you then, in
Okay.
terms of how you describe this. Is the historical tax exemption an income or expenditure?
Well, it's good. I think I probably should have included that. That is actually something they're looking for guidance on because of the way we want to inform our taxpayers, whether that's going to be included or not, and not wait till basically August, in fact, to surprise them one way or the other. So I think that is one that is part of this agenda item. And then the next agenda item is really focused on the TRE potential and the tax rate at the top level. So, yeah. So go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I want to talk about what to me is probably the easier of the items, and that's protection of the compensation for our employees. I am certainly supportive of somehow providing our employees with a 3% tax increase, 3% merit increase, 3% change in salary increase, however we legally or most appropriately describe it. I'm concerned that given that, and I completely agree that over the past 2 years we needed to freeze the salaries that we had, but if we do not take some action this year to adjust their compensation, then with the other districts in the neighboring areas already claiming or putting a stake in the ground, as someone else described before, that they are going to have salary adjustments of 3%, then we will have gone 3 years without a tax increase, a merit increase, and we will have lost ground amongst our peer districts. The combination of those two makes it a no-brainer for me, and so I want to go on record that I think the appropriate thing in order for us to continue to keep good employees and to try to remain competitive in the marketplace and put your job in a way that at least you can continue to compete for good employees, is that we that I support that 3% change in compensation, whatever we call it. I do think, though, that we need to, once again, be creative, and as we go into next year, we really need to think about something other than our strategic compensation program for recognizing outstanding employees in the district, teachers and others. And I'm less than convinced that our strategic comp program is the way to do it. And as we look at reallocation of monies and funds, I think we need to be very objective about which programs are providing us the most benefit for our investment. And so as we look to reward our more valuable employees, we do so by looking at all our revenue streams and how we're allocating compensation. So now to talk about the historic tax exemption, I'm really torn on this one because I think like one other activity that we had during the year, we've spent a lot of time and really haven't achieved what I think could have been done very simply, and that's adding one more question to the City of Austin's sheet of questions that they ask when people apply for their exemptions every year, and that being, what educational interactions have you had with the Austin Independent School District, or any school district for that matter? And then if the answer is yes, they have done something, then documenting that with as simple as a letter from a principal or a teacher or whatever it is that shows that they have worked with the district in some way, shape, or fashion. And to me, that's all I've been asking for, and I'm just disappointed that something that simple can't be done. As a result of that, while I support certain historic tax exemptions for some people, it's those people that provide benefit to the district. And I have said, as I have said over and over and over again, the approaches the city uses is different and the way the city benefits from it is different, and we're helping the city, and I think there are reasons why we should help our partners in the district, both commercial and residential partners in the district. And that's all I would have asked, and to me, that would have made a big difference. But that's, since that can't be done, or hasn't been done, then I'm not going to be able to support that one. But other than that, Ms. Abrams, I really appreciate all your work on this. I think you've done an excellent job, and I'm very supportive of everything else in the packet.
Ms. Moya.
Thank you. Mr. Torres, I have a question for you. When you were referring to the 3% salary increase or merit increase, were you talking about the one time, or are you talking about something permanent?
I think it needs to be permanent. How we get there, that's why I don't want to call it anything in particular. I just think we need to achieve that. And if it means achieving it in some way, shape, or fashion this year, and then either changing our minds a little later in the year and going for a TRE that would offset it if we so structure the motion that way, that's fine with me. But I think it needs to be a permanent change in salary at some point.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I understood what you were referring to. I agree it needs to be permanent. I just don't know how quickly we can get there, given what appears to be an anti-tax sentiment out in the general public. You know, how much of that is in Austin, I don't really know. It's just, you know, something that I'm familiar with in my day-to-day work activities. But I do agree it needs to be permanent. We just need to be very strategic and smart about how we do this so that we are successful and that we don't, that our employees aren't disappointed. My only the only other item I wanted to address is the historic landmark property exemptions. I have the same concerns that Mr. Torres has. I still am concerned about exemptions or a perceived benefit to some property owners that other property owners in our district do not get. I understand what it's there for. I get it, but you know, the city can give away that exemption because they have multiple resource streams that school districts don't have. They have hotel occupancy tax, they have car rental tax, they have sales tax, and a variety of other things that they have the benefit of, which school districts do not have and are statutorily not allowed to have. So, you know, it's just not the same. And so, so I too am very torn because, you know, there are neighborhoods, you know, all over town that have quite a few historic landmarks for, you know, whether it be architectural or whatever. And I feel like, you know, I'm having real difficulty with this because I understand why it's there, but I also have an issue with equity and fairness for all taxpayers. So I haven't made up my mind on that yet.
If I can respond to Trustee Torres, the city, unfortunately, when we began to have the discussions around modifying the application, the city had already moved forward with implementing with their legal counsel the application that they had structured as a result of their litigation settlement. They are amenable to changing that and adding the additional questions, and so we will work with them to ensure that that question is included on next year's application. But unfortunately, the timing of this year, we were unable to get on to modify the application in time. So I'm pretty confident that we can work with the city to try to include that additional information on next year's application.
So then, can I take that, because your word is golden as far as I'm concerned, that if you say that we'll do that, I'll change my vote right here and now?
Mel, I mean, I feel.
Would you please tell Mr. Torres that we cannot make any guarantees, but I feel very confident that the city will make good on its representation.
We both, So I feel myself, along with the general counsel, feel very confident that the city will be amenable and make that change for next year's application. When we approached them about the idea this year, the application had already been developed and they had already come to some agreement with the parties as part of the settlement per se, resulting from that pending looming lawsuit. So, but they have demonstrated strong support for modifying the form in any way that we see necessary. And so we feel pretty confident that we can make that happen for next year. That we can include a question or two that would give us the information that would give us that additional insight.
Well, your credibility is diluted when you bring on the attorney part. So I'm gonna leave it at your word, and I'm more than happy to sort of give you the very simple sort of questions that I'm looking for, and the types of things that could very easily be documented to say, if you did something, just a letter from a school, something that shows educational partnership with the district in some way. Doesn't have to be 400 kids tromping through your home. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm simply looking for a way to separate those people that are doing it strictly for the financial benefit and those that really see the value of a historical property and how that can provide educational value to our district. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Ms. Torres, I'm going to go here anyways. So I think what Ms. Conley referred to, which maybe come with, is for new applications, not necessarily renewals of existing.
Once again, if it's Ms. Abrams' word and not the general counsel's, I'm more than happy to.
I don't want our public to think that we don't
go
have
forward
confidence
with
in our
it.
general counsel. So, but I want to make sure, because I don't think it's going to be about renewals. I just want to make sure.
I understand, and I understand the issue that this year they may not have been able to get it for whatever reason, but as long as as I have a commitment from someone that says they will work to make that change for next year, then I'm happy to support it for this year.
Okay, do you have a follow-up on that, Ms. Moya? Go ahead.
So, Mr. Williams, why can't those questions be asked for renewals?
Well, I'm not the person to ask that. I think the question is, because I just want to make sure, I think when they talk about the application, that's for new. There's a different process for the renewal each year and the review.
Well,
Right.
is the different process for the review of the property, but they have to apply for the exemption
year?
every year. So they would, on that application, we could add the additional
So
questions.
just make sure then, I guess, it's for all properties,
All
renewals or
properties
new.
that are applying for the exemption,
Okay.
Commercial or residential?
commercial or residential.
Just trying to anticipate another question and just might come up.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments? Ms. Schneider?
Mr. Torres, a couple of things that have been said concern me. First of all, with regard to the questions that were asked, I mean, what is the educational benefit? I mean, that was the big question last year. And it sounds to me like we're getting the same answer that we got last year, that they were going to try and work on doing something and it didn't get done. I mean, for me, for the historical property tax exemption, it's the same thing that the suit with the city was. I mean, we need to document the need for granting an exemption, not just, I don't want it to be just a case of the city signed off on it, we therefore are finding that we agree with whatever need that they set forward. I've happened to have seen enough of these renovations in Central Austin that, to me, some of them are just, some of the properties that are historical, declared historical, it's just really pushing the boundaries. Like I watched one over about a period of 6 months or a year where they entirely redid the house, but added a swimming pool and another structure in the back. That you can see when the winter's there and there's no trees and leaves and that kind of stuff. But that property is now declared a historic property. And I'd also like to get some clarification on commercial. What do we mean by commercial?
I'm sorry. What do we mean by commercial property as opposed to residential owner-occupied
Right.
properties? I will have to follow up with the statutory definition of commercial. It's in our existing
The
language.
case that came to mind when I saw the presentation here was the discussion last week at council, or at least part of it, was over short-term rentals. And we know that there are folks that are buying up houses, renting them out during South by Southwest or ACL or whatever, but they're owned by commercial entities. Are those properties commercial for the definition of this historic exemption?
I would have to verify that whether or not the short-term rentals are actually, the entity determines whether or not the use, I'd have to confirm that.
Okay. Also, on page 18 as well, if we were not to grant the historic property tax exemption, how much money would the district keep out of the money that we would keep from not giving the exemption?
The total is about $350,000. We actually, it would impact on our M&O budget. At the last time we did our estimates, about $112,000, close to $113,000. And then another $251,000 on our INS. We would be able to retain an additional revenue without the exemption.
Okay, so something just a little bit less than $400,000 in, between 350 and 400.
Yeah, it's close to about 360,000. Yeah, yeah.
All right, that answers it. On page 15, if I can get to page 15. The breakdown, Michael, I guess this will be for you.
Yes, sir.
The health contribution comparisons. Are any of the local districts that we're comparing to on TRS Active Care here?
There are some that are indeed, yes, sir.
Okay. We're talking about one or two, or everyone
you-
but us, or?
The majority of these people will be involved in TRS. About, I think, Nicole, as I can recall, about 1/3 are still
yeah, I
doing
know-
their own insurance.
Most of them are doing their own. I know Eanes is part of TRS Active Care. And I'm not quite sure about Pflugerville and Leander, but the remaining sort of are still running their own programs. And so when we look at, the district, and we've come a long way. I mean, this was the first year that we implemented the first phase of sort of the buy-up program. We had fully subsidized even more robust plan than we are today. But it is, I think the district sort of, we had invested a lot of resources in maintaining very high quality health plan. But even the standard plan that we're trying to sort of fully, we're going to subsidize the standard plan, it is a better plan than what we look at when we see the standard plan under TRS care or the standard plans that are offered by some of our our regional competitors. So if you look at the standard plan that Round Rock fully pays for the employee, even our standard plan, which is a comparative to that, is slightly better. So most districts have a premium plan that you can buy up. So this is something that we're instituting. We're just phasing in the actual impact to the employees. So 13-14 will be the first year that the employees will actually pay for the buy-up program 100%.
Okay. And finally, I'm just trying to get some clarification on the fund balance drawdown. And the 29 million or so, does that include the one-time 3% or however we're going to do that?
Yes, it does.
Okay. So we're looking at basically something very close to $30 million out of fund balance this year, including the one-time payment, or however that's structured out. And I'm fine with any way it's done that you described, Michael.
That would be probably the maximum.
Okay.
It could be lower.
Does it include any money lost from either directly that we would obtain from the federal government or through the state education agency if a budget sequestration is done at the federal level?
It doesn't include any draws for sequestration. We have a contingency budget that we've put in place to account for that 10% reduction that was made to our planning amount. And so we are actually going to implement those contingency budgets. Should that funding become available as we progress, hopefully by the time school starts, we'll really release those additional dollars. But right now, we're implementing our contingency plans related to the 10% reduction.
Okay. And is the contingency plan phased in out of fund balance, or is it being?
No, we're altering our spending plans associated with those federal grants.
Okay. All right, thank you.
just follow, because the sequestration, we have a little bit of federal dollars that affect our general fund, and we have a bigger bulk of federal dollars that affect grant funded. And so the sequestration contingency plan is on the, and your budget book actually shows this, is the Title I, Title II IDEA money. So that's where the sequestration strategy planning is going.
Yes.
And then but for the general fund, it probably is not expected to be a material impact on the general fund side of things.
No, it's not.
Okay. Other questions or comments?
You meant IDEA, not
IDEA, right. Individuals with Disability Education Act. Other questions or comments? Okay, just a couple to follow up. I know what Mr. Snyder was just referring to on page 15, just not tonight, but if you could just give us a list of what insurance
We can do that.
things everyone's got, that'd be helpful.
Who participates in TRS? Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
just because I do think that in the past, you know, when we looked at some of these, they had all the same amount, but then now you can tell different districts are contributing different amounts, so they're not even contributing all, so the variety has changed. I want to follow up on this question, when we get to the historical property tax exemption about applications for new versus renewal. I knew I had a thought about why I was going there. Is what I'm concerned about is for staffing, even if they get it for all of them, the hundreds of properties, and they have some educational benefit narrative, I don't think our staff has the staff time, the capacity to review each of those to say, is that sufficient benefit, not a benefit? So I mean, we can gather the information. The question is, what are we going to do with it? New, pretty simple. Does it qualify or not? We can say yes or no. But for the hundreds that are already there, you know, what's the thinking, or do you have an idea about, if we had that information, what we would do with it? Ms. Torres.
It would be used as a screening tool, Mr. Williams, with regard to who actually qualifies. In other words, basically in the city system, unless you're declared a historical property, you go nowhere. So that's the sort of the first hurdle that has to be passed. This would be our comparable hurdle, that if you have done nothing, then you don't even qualify. So what I'm looking for in this first year, or in initial questioning, is how many of these folks are actually providing some sort of interaction with the district. If the answer is yes, then they can benefit the way we have set up our taxing system. We don't need to have any other folks read the applications. It's just, if the city takes the questions and they provide us the answers, that's all we need to have.
They provide us the answers. So I know it's a year away, but would you envision that someone on our staff would need to look at the answers that they got to say, is that enough? Is it, you know?
At some point in time, I think, as we look at the type of information, either, you know, if the Whatchamajiggle Society, the
Heritage Society,
who has expressed interest in wanting us to help us in doing this, if they have some guidance as to how we would look at that information, I'm happy to work with them to help us improve the quality of those folks that are involved with AISD. You know, we've got this new wiki tool. We've got the social studies curriculum. I mean, there are a number of things that we're going to be doing as part of either our plan or other folks' plan. We can then decide how we want to use that information later. But to not have any sort of a question that is sort of a yes or no, to me is just not responsible. So at least this would provide us a way to identify those folks that are doing something.
forces them to at least answer something.
Absolutely.
So I think it's, you know, that's really a year away because it's not on this year's forms. We're just going to have to plan a little bit about how do we accommodate that. And I think as we think about for next week also is an update, if you have it now, great. If you don't, next week, about what, and it could be in writing, what we've received so far in terms of benefit, because Mr. Torres just referred to the Heritage Society and others came and spoke about the things that we would get in terms of curriculum and knowledge of Austin and all that stuff. So I think just something that tells us what we've gotten in exchange, the in-kind benefits we've gotten in exchange for the $364,000 that essentially we're foregoing. And I think the context that people need to remember is we're collecting 2.1, maybe 2.2 million, and we're only keeping 364 if we do it. So which means the state's going to pick up most of the amount. Okay, can I throw one more at you, Nicole? The Mr. Torres referred to it, and I hope this is right, but I hadn't thought about the way, but I think he's saying on the salary increase to make it permanent, I actually would support that, and rather than one time, because Michael, you may have to tell me, I'm not sure what the competitive benefit of giving, you know, we're going to go out and compete, and we're going to give you a one-time payment, but we may not have it next year, whereas the risks around us, I think, are giving giving salary increases that are built into their base, knowing that if let's get two different scenarios, right? We do a TRE at some point in the future and we lose, or we get bigger cuts from the legislature that just kills us. We're going to have to deal with it anyways. We're going to have impact salaries. We're going to have to do future staffing issues, if we get crushed. But I'm not sure competitively if we are giving some one-time payment thing, if that would put us, really, truly at a competitive human capital perspective. You may have to give some insight into that. And I know you've talked about it with the other associations, and I don't know that if we had given people a salary increase, and we're going to give them some payment, then we go out to the taxpayers, that it's going to be particularly compelling and persuasive to say, these people we gave a comp increase to, we want a tax increase to make that permanent. I don't know if that's a particularly persuasive argument. So at least for me, you might give a perspective about the
Yes.
human capital implications of a one-time versus a permanent increase in salary.
Mr. Williams, I think most everyone would prefer to have it a permanent fixture, but I do think there's a degree of hesitancy to tap something that's a recurring expenditure without a revenue stream that's just as permanent. So our associations that have worked with us seem to understand that quite well, but it's difficult for us, particularly coming off of the RIF last year and some of the other pieces and parts in the system, to be not to be cognizant of the fact that if we didn't have a revenue stream that was permanent, that it certainly would become an expenditure that could become critically important to this district. So it's something that we can discuss and think through, but our associations have been pretty good to understand that without the constant revenue, it might be a big question for us.
Yeah, and my fear is that the climate we create is if we give it and then it goes away and the gap is bigger between us and our surrounding districts, is that better or worse? I mean, it's really kind of a longer, I mean, I understand what you're saying in terms of the financial economic implications, that if we give it and then it goes away because we don't have the revenue stream, but I'm just thinking longer term. If we give it, we're going to have to deal with it one way or the other. Either people are going to have to agree with huge budget cuts to take a salary cut going forward, or we're going to have fewer people since we're substantially a people business. But really, is it better for us to build it into the base, both for TRS purposes, but really for recruiting and retention standpoint? Because if I'm an employee, I might say I'd rather go over there and get a permanent increase than get this maybe one-time thing. And if I recall our experience with the stipends that we did, even though it was built in, it didn't feel like a real salary increase to everybody.
It will not change our salary schedules at this point. So, yes, sir, there are two schools of thought. Yes, sir.
Well, Dr. Steffen.
Mr. President, trustees of the board, this is transitioning into our next agenda item. In the consideration of the tax ratification election, I don't want to break the flow of things, but if we could switch,
move to that space, yeah.
because there's some other parts to it. So your next agenda item is specifically about the tax ratification election, and this is the kind of conversation the administration was looking forward to having with you, especially as it relates to the increase for compensation for staff salaries. What could a possible, what are some other areas where we believe there may be a need for stable funding streams, like full-day pre-K, or the work that we're doing with the Kennedy Center around the fine arts, or, you can name many of the other things going on in the district. The board's desire as one of its priorities to enhance the portfolio of options. It's just, there are things that will require new dollars. So and there's not a presentation. It's just an ongoing part of your conversation. But this, if we were to just kind of continue down the discussion you started with Mr. Hauser, our recommendation is based on, or this design from the previous agenda item is based on what we think we're hearing for the purposes of a tax ratification election, which is that we're not looking at November 2012, and that's what I want to just be sure I've got clear guidance on when we walk out of here tonight. We're not, and so what you just saw on the last agenda item just shows that 3% equivalent increase. If we are going to do a TRE for November 2012, that totally changes the game, and the question that you're asking becomes moot, and we can just move forward on a permanent increase that would be a rollback to ensure that it passes before we make the commitment. So if we want to do that, we can, but that's what we really would need to decide and prepare ourselves for. You know that y'all asked some questions. We've been providing you those responses over the last few weeks, but there are many things that are still missing, like, you know, a poll. That we still don't have, and I'm going to ask Nicole to kind of weigh in. You may have read in the paper some of the things about the light rail piece to the puzzle, and you know what's happening, for at least from what we can pick up from the newspapers and some of our intel. You know what's happening with the medical school, and do we want to be there in November? But we still have an opportunity to do that. What I know that the CFO and I agree on is that I would not, I mean, of course, you can direct me to do it, but it would not be my recommendation that we spend money that we don't have. If we do not have the revenue stream, I do not recommend permanent salary increases, knowing that we don't have another revenue stream to look at going into a blind legislative session. So, but if that's the desire of the board, that is definitely something we should sort out and really prepare the organization for, and have a, work diligently on a backup plan so that if you have to take that out of your M&O, what are we letting go of on the other side if you don't have the funding stream to support it? But I'll leave it there, and this is exactly where we want to be, for the next 30 minutes or so, to be sure we are clear about what we are putting together for you and the message that we're coming out with as it relates to the tax ratification election.
Okay, let's open comments for questions about a potential. Ms. Moya.
Well, I'm a little bit over here with the superintendent on what are we letting go, which I'm going back to one of those items, those 10 items or whatever it was on that list from last year, and going back to the second planning period. So for example, if we let the second planning period go, that gives us somewhere, $11 million or something like that, that nearly pays for
11.
I think it was 11.4.
11.4, so that
ma'am.
nearly pays for a permanent salary increase. Is that correct?
About 2 to 2.5%, yes, ma'am.
So as we talk about, a TRE, and, if we include in our conversation, what do we let go of, or those are the kinds of things I think we do need to talk about, because in absence of a poll to really know what the voting public in within the AISD boundaries are feeling like, it's kind of hard to, to decide what we're going to do, because, traditionally Austin is a much more public school supporting environment, but the landscape of our community has changed in a variety of different ways over the last many years. And so, there are those, influences from other places that don't necessarily feel as strongly about public education as we do, and they do have an influence. And so, I do believe we need to have a poll as quickly as possible, but I would like for us to include in our conversation what things we might have to let go of should we want this increase to be permanent. And if a TRE is not the appropriate thing, then what are we going to do in order to make it permanent? And so, because I agree that something that's a one-time doesn't feel all that hot, knowing that you're going to have it for a little bit and then you have to let it go. So,
May
this
I
is just my quick thoughts.
And thank you, Ms. Moy. May I respond just one thing, because I'd be remiss if I didn't let the board know this. I know that that second period is an issue that we've always looked at. Just be aware of the fact, and it's just a fact, that if we were to go back and pick up that extra planning period, that you would take out approximately 200 more teachers out of your secondary schools, because the day would shrink, the offerings would shrink, and that's where the $11 million comes from. So just let me remind you that the greatest reduction in force that we did last year was at the secondary level. At the end of the day, that's where really the reduction occurred, because we took the pupil-teacher ratio up to 176. And I'd be very remiss if I just didn't tell you, keep in mind then that the number of teachers on your campuses throughout this city at the secondary level will be reduced by 200. That's where that $11 million is at. So just please, please keep in mind it would have an impact on FTEs.
Okay, other questions or comments on potential TRE? Ms. Lavoy?
I just have a question. Are you prepared with an update on what the other jurisdictions are planning? And could you fill us in on that?
Sure, thank you. I think I provided an initial update to the board in the board weekly update about some of the sort of initial plans that the jurisdictions were planning. There have been some, I've received some additional information in sort of preparing for the presentation to the joint task force. The city has moved down the path towards a November 2012 bond for its general bond election. Their task force has come up with sort of a short list of recommendations for city council action that is scheduled in August. Apparently, there's been a few council members who are questioning whether or not the city should move forward with that bond proposal. So there is still some level of uncertainty as to whether or not the city will move forward with that action for 2012 for the general bond program. Right now, it's about $359 million or so. They whittled it down from the $600 million plus. They've taken out some of the rail action items. I don't know if you're all aware that the mayor has expressed that he will not move forward with a recommendation of the light rail project. And so city staff have indicated that that's at this time has at least been postponed for a year, for at least a year. So you probably won't see the light rail come up for possible action until at the earliest 2013, or if it even comes up at that point in time, so that the staff can do additional analysis. So when that's sort of taken into effect, so now we sort of have the possibility of the general city bond election. There's also been discussion in the medical school. Unfortunately, no new insights have been brought to light regarding the medical school. They're still moving forward with their feasibility analysis. And their CFO has indicated that, again, it may not be available to the end of August. So 2012, we're contemplating at this point, I think staff feels fairly confident that the city bond program will move forward for 2012, but there is some level of uncertainty. ACC has reconfirmed that they probably won't consider anything till 2014 in terms of their bond programming and election. The county is considering a potential new county courthouse, which will cost about $338 million. That could go on the ballot for 2013. However, it does not have to. If it's so severe, the county can take the action to move forward with it as they have now. They've already implemented about $25 to $50 million worth of cash outlays to improve that county courthouse action. So that may or may not go on the ballot, and it's probably unlikely that it would, but that is a potential. So right now, as it stands, there have been no sort of initial claims on 2013. So at this point in time, it is a sort of free and open space at this point, unless things get pushed out into 2013 if folks can't make decisions on the medical school, or the city decides to postpone its general obligation and sort of push it out, and you have sort of the ripple effect of sort of not moving forward with those initiatives that have been initially scheduled for 2012. And then again, the light rail, which many staff believe that even 2013 would be too early to even consider the light rail, considering where they are in terms of their analysis. So unfortunately, there's still no real certainty. I think we'll know in August once the city has taken action on whether or not it's going to move forward with this its general bond election. And hopefully we'll get some better insights on the medical school program.
Can I follow up just on that question? On tab 4, the salary increases that these other districts are, that we understand that they're projecting, are they anticipating any TREs or tax increases to affect those compensation increases? Because I think at least for one of them I heard that they're not planning on raising tax rates, they're going to fund it out of reserves. Are any of the other districts going to have a tax election to affect these salary increases? And if we don't know, we can just find out.
So I'm not aware that any of these districts, Lake Travis I would have to check on because they obviously had went out one time before, and so I need to confirm that. I definitely know Round Rock is moving forward with the deficit budget. Leander is not moving forward with the TRE recommendation, and neither is Maynard. I'd have to check on Lake Travis and confirm with Pflugerville, and I'm not quite sure about Bastrop, so I can follow up with their
You can just
respective
double check.
CFOs.
I think all of these are permanent increases, right? None of these are stipends or one-time compensation payments.
Yes,
Yes.
they are permanent. Yes, sir.
Because I think, I want to point out to the board, when you look at tab 4 and the increases people are doing, and then you go to page 50 in our binder, which was page 50 of the budget book. It's not really in the tabs, but it shows the tax rates of the surrounding jurisdictions, including us. And on the M&O rates, everyone else is at $1.04. We're at $1.79, and we already have a salary deficit. It's one of those things that if we raise our tax rates, we're creating a double whammy, and that our tax rate, we can't win a price war, right? Because people can raise tax rates higher than we can. And so we might be able to make a very short-term jump if it goes for compensation, and then we end up, we're just putting off the fact that they can catch up to us rather rapidly. So I think we need to really think about ways that we can affect savings, and I don't know that, to me, I'm necessarily thinking it has to be done next school year, but if we look to doing the compensation increase, and if we're making it permanent, then we basically have a year to think about what savings would we do, and it might be additional staffing. That's desirable, but what do we have to do? And I think we can work in partnership with AAPSA and the Education Austin folks, and also we'll come out of the next legislative session. But I think if we're not careful, we're not going to become competitive on salaries, and it might be not a one-year thing, but I'm really looking longer term, our ability to compete for human capital, that we're going to create a climate that people don't feel like this is the place to be, and they may stay with us for a year, but they're going to be looking, and we may not understand the impact until the end of next year. I understand what you're saying, Dr. Starfin, about building a run rate that is not sustainable, but we're going to face this battle at some point. And I think we have to get in front of it, and I do think we have some compelling arguments for the public about where we have to fund the deficit spending that we're having. And I think hopefully public awareness will understand that. And I'm not sure just tying it strictly to a salary comp isn't necessarily the most compelling argument, but I'm just worried that from a short and long-term human capital competitive standpoint, if we don't get our people up, knowing that we have other implications, we could be in a world of hurt longer term. Ms. Moore, you get your hand up.
Well, I wanted to add to what you were saying, that if, as we consider changing our educational program in the district to meet or match the workforce needs in our community, we're going to need educators with additional skills that they may not have now. And so, or different types of educators. If we're going to look at, the different reports that come out from the different entities that say in 10 years, this kind of job market is going to exist in Austin or Central Texas, and we're going to need these kinds of, graduates from high schools with these kinds of skills, then, we need to be looking at that as we look at our educational program for the community, and then, and then see what it is that we need what kind of folks do we need in our classrooms for our kids, and what, and what is the market value for those? Because that's something else we need to be considering. I mean, if we're going to have a medical school, a college, then, do we need to have programs within our school district that prepare kids to go into the medical school? I mean, do we have that now? No. So, those are the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about when we start talking about these things. I don't think we should leave those conversations out of or those issues out of the conversation.
Other questions or comments about TRE? Ms. Schneider?
I do want to, it is going to, and if we start looking at alternatives, I just want to obviously put on the table that really looking at the sort of total compensation, because as you look at our investments for our health plan, we've funded health as opposed to salaries. And so, that's about $900, in some cases, $1,000 differential that we're funding for every teacher that's not in the salary, but it's in the health plan.
Right.
So it's going to require some hard conversations with our partners at Austin, AAPSA, about potentially modifying our health plan to be more competitive and putting that money into paychecks as opposed to the health plan.
So bear with me, I'm going to jump back, because on page 15 of the presentation where you show your healthcare comparison, that's based on the 413, which is where we are now, but we're already showing on your previous, next slide, we're going up to 446, so I don't know what they're doing, but our gap in terms of what our healthcare increment over what they're spending is growing. And I've also heard that for some people, our family coverage, I don't know if where it's competes, because a lot of folks, it's not only the individual coverage, but what's the cost of family coverage, and that some of the other plans might be more competitive on a family coverage basis. So I think, as Michael, you look at the human capital side, if we decide to go a permanent route, just one person's opinion, but if we decide to go and make that permanent, we've got to look at all those things, not for FY13, but if we don't have the revenue stream, what the impact's going to be in FY14. And you're already moving down the path of potentially changing some of the healthcare coverages. We're going to have to find savings. But I think it's figuring out what's the right mix of competitiveness for human capital. And it's a complex equation, because we've got young employees and older employees and people with families and some with no families. And those with no families that are young, that are healthy, probably they'd rather have some of this in compensation than they would in health care coverage. And that may be different for people that are older or have kids. I'm not sure exactly where our family coverage costs shake out, but I thought at one point we were higher than some of the other districts. So, again, we don't decide tonight, to me, but I think it does have an implication for that question about what would the FY14 cost savings be if for some reason we can't sustain a compensation increase if we put it in permanent in FY13. And it could be that we have to adjust compensation, people, or other non-people related costs, which we're pretty thin on that. Ms. Schneider. Sorry.
Well, I haven't changed my position on the TRE. I mean, I would like to do the 3% out of fund balance this year, like we've been talking about, and like to wait till after the ledge and the courts at least try and work their way through some of the issues that are there. But, I do agree with Ms. Moya that I think we need to be looking at, items that we can be prepared to do without, because we are already at a run rate, as you put it, Mr. Williams, that we simply cannot sustain. I mean, we're taking $30 million out of fund balance this year just to cover all the things that we need to do, plus give one-time 3% or however that works out to be to our employees. So unless we want to go out and raise taxes, I think we really have an obligation to look at how we can do things differently first. And I was reading something the other day, Nicole, you might have seen this or know more about it, but ever since the ledge underfunded public ed by the amount they did in the last session, that there's been only like 50 districts that have gone out for a TRE election, I believe, something pretty close to that out of 1,020 right now. And I think the article said that less than half of those were successful. So, it's not a pretty picture to try and go out and raise money right now by increasing taxes. And, I think we should do everything we can internally first, and then if we run out of options, that's our last option. So,
Ms. Torres.
I don't want to pile on, so I won't talk about that topic, but I want to talk about it in a slightly different way. And that's when we look at our cost per student in terms of expenditures in comparison to other districts, whether we look at fast districts, whether we look at slow districts, whether we look at Big Eight, districts our size, I don't care. It would help me to try to understand why we tend to be, 1,000 more or whatever that amount is more. And, when you talk about that over 87,000 students or so, that's a lot of money. And so if we can identify what that is and make sure that we're comfortable expending that difference over our peer districts or over whatever we consider to be a good comparable base to look at, that might give us some food for thought as to what where we might want to consider reducing cost. So that would be one thing that I think we need to think about as we go forward over the next couple of months. The other one, the reason I say the next couple of months before we start preparing the next budget, the other thing that I think we need to think about is, we've got a bond advisory committee that is going to come to us, sometime looking at a bond election as early as next year. And so even if we don't have a TRE this year and we decide to put it off, are we going to be going out for both a TRE and a bond in the same year? To me, that doesn't seem real smart. So I think we need to think about the staging of those two requests for additional funding. I'm not suggesting that we that's a justification for going out for a TRE now, but I think we need to think about if we don't do it now or this year, and we have both of them come up in the same year, does that mean we put off our bond election, capital improvement bond election, 2 years? If that's the case, then I'm not sure how we use the work of the committee that we've got, and I would hate for them to spend a lot of time only to give us a recommendation and say, it's great, put it on the shelf. So I think that's something else we need to think about, is how we're going to deal with the bond, for our capital improvement bond.
Other thoughts or comments on this item? Okay, Ms. Moya.
Well, Mr. Torres, I think when you guys do the research, I think you may find, that part of the cost per student is based on, and why it's higher for us is because the cost of education index is 20 years old, so it doesn't account for a whole lot of things here in AISD as far as what it costs to educate a child here versus what it costs to educate a child in South Texas or West Texas. And also the weights and allotments formulas are old, and so it doesn't account for a lot of things. And so, Robert, you're
I think you're on.
am I on the right track?
Why the
Gotta be
observation I
finished.
would make is that the cost of education index for us is the weights and formulas haven't changed in the valley either. So,
I know, but the
The
cost of
demographics
education in a
may
different
change.
part of the state is different than it is here.
right. But, I mean, there hasn't been a change across the board where, there's a whole lot of money that's floating around in one place.
It's worse for what?
The whole state.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's bad everywhere. But what I'm just saying that I believe that in some cases, that's why it looks different for us. Because of those particular things. I'm sure there's others, plenty of others, that things that cause those dollar amounts to look different for us. But I think that may be part of it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that may be
I think
part
it's
of it.
complicated because the formulas themselves, and I might need to have Ed help me out on this, but the formulas themselves aren't properly updated, right? So the cost of education index, the weights for students and the demographic of students. But right now, most of the state's not funding on the formulas, they're funding on target revenue. So it's somewhat separate. And I think to Mr. Torres's point, if you look at page 16 of our budget revenue, when you look at the target revenue, which is impacted, but when they go to the formulas, which are going to be, there's a lot of discussion about going there, they've got to get the cost of education index adjusted. But I think the point here, which I wasn't going to raise, but I will now, when you look at the general fund spend per district and you compare us to the other, for lack of a better term, the big 8 districts, which is not all big 8, so basically the large urban majority minority school districts, we're the highest spend. And you say, okay, why is that? And we know we have, part of this is our target revenue, and I don't know if it includes recapture, and I think I asked that question to say, is that included a recapture or not? But I know we spend money on things like Social Security, but so does San Antonio, and they're spending $1,000 less than us roughly. We have full day pre-K, but I think but our salary schedule, as we know from looking at this, are lower. So we have lower salaries. We do spend higher on some things. We spend higher on Social Security. I'm not sure where the staffing ratios shake out. What we know from the number we just saw, the health insurance is higher. We don't have to solve, but I think this is where, do we have an answer for all that stuff? Or are there ways to say we just need to make sure we're fully prepared before we go for a tax increase so we can answer all those questions? Because in a tax election, you don't want to open yourselves up to organized opposition who can ask questions for which we aren't prepared to really answer, why our cost structure, our revenue level is higher. And I think we do have a lot of things that are occurring that we don't yet have complete answers for. So I know we're talking now about a tax ratification election in November. Let me preface by saying I support the expenditure budget that we have, the compensation payment that we need to have. I think we need to wait until August to make a final decision about the tax election of this November. My inclination right now is not to do it this year, but the assumption is based on that the city's going to go with a comprehensive bond and there'll be some major medical initiative on the ballot, and that we need to stake out, I think that phrase was used, next year, and say we're going next year. Now, if we get to August and that we find out that the city and the health aren't going at all, but they're going to go next year, then that may change the dynamics because of timing that we may have to deal with. But I think all indications are both of them are going, but I think we'll know more in August. But I think right now, I would be reluctant for us to try to go out to taxpayers with all 3 entities going out for significant tax requests in November of 12. I just think we could potentially overwhelm them. And I know Nicole mentioned the joint subcommittee, but I think on June 22nd is a meeting of the joint subcommittee at which the CFOs are coming back with some updated information about what each of the jurisdictions are planning. And I believe, Nicole, at the last subcommittee, there was a request to try to get an update from Central Health and ACC. So hopefully in a couple weeks, we'll have a better updated about what everybody's doing, although they may not know until August. But I think we just run the risk that if we can go too soon. And I think we'd be better served potentially by staking out 13, if we can, and having lots of answers to lots of questions that we don't yet have. But just one opinion. So, but I support the expenditure budget as you've proposed. I appreciate all the investments, and we have a lot of needs in our district. And I think you've done a wonderful job of putting together a book and a detailed analysis that tells us where the money's going. But I think we as a board, along with the administration, have to decide what we're going to do on the revenue side at some point, which is really dependent on a tax election. So, Mr. Snyder and Dr. Christopher, I both had your hands up. You want to wait? Okay, Mr. Snyder.
Dr. Christopher, why don't you go ahead, and mine's a pretty brief, specific question for Nicole.
Okay, yeah. Mr. President, I just want to be sure that I heard you correctly. And for clarification purposes, in preparation for Monday's regular meeting. So based on what you just said, what I heard is that we are not preparing any kind of action type item that is communicating to the public that we would be considering a November 2012 TRE here at your last meeting in June. I know it's not the actual, action on the tax rate, but I'm just saying what we are, so we would not be communicating that. And if y'all were going to make a decision on that, you're saying that decision would be in August when we're taking that action.
Well, I'm just one person.
I know, but
we need to get input from the rest of the board. I know that I would, if we had to make a decision next Monday, I would say, don't go. Because based on all indications, the city and the healthcare district are going, and I think we need to know that. The world may be a different place in 2 months, so I would hate to take a firm decision. Mr. Schneider and then Ms. Brister.
Can he read your mind?
I think I can. Ms. Conley Abrams, on the work that you've been doing with the other CFOs, and I know that from the last joint meeting we had, you guys were going to work together to figure out who was going when and what the amounts would be and everything else. How are you intending to present that to any of the organizations involved?
Thank you. We are actually preparing, we're trying to we've got templates that we've built for each jurisdiction to populate both sort of historical and projected M&O as well as INS tax rate based upon various scenarios. So we're putting together some hypothetical scenarios, making certain assumptions by the 100 jurisdictions. So one would be if we assume status quo, nobody made any changes there were no elections, right? So what would be if we just basically carried out the current authorizations as it relates to bonds and tax rates? And then also whether or not the elections that are currently on the table, should they come to fruition. So if the city goes out in 2012, in that bond authorization was approved, how would it affect the tax rate? And then concurrently, if Austin ISD went out for a TRE in 2013 and sequencing of events. So we're kind of consolidating the tax rate impacts based upon various scenarios, and then we're presenting the taxpayer impact utilizing both the average and median average household. And so we'll sort of present all this data points. We're collecting the data points, organizing them now. And so the city's making efforts to get some data points from the healthcare district because they're quite overwhelmed at this point in time. But we'll present that to the Joint Task Force on the 22nd. So, and then we'll have some understanding as to how these scenarios would affect the taxpayer.
Okay, great. That's definitely headed in the place that I'd like to see it go. And the only other thing that I would like to see added, and I'm not really sure it's up to you guys to add it, but discussion of prioritization as to, well, it's more important for the school district to do this because of this kind of need. Or it's more important for healthcare to do it because if we don't do it now, it'll never get done in 10 years, or whatever the thing is. But I think that in making that case, again, I don't think it's necessarily the CFOs that need to make the case, but possibly the people that are on that committee as to what the prioritizations are. And I just think that given the discussion specifically around the tax load that the community already has and is being talked about asking to have increased either through us or light rail or whatever the issue is, that there needs to be some broad discussion about what's more important when. That's what it comes down to. So, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to add to anything, but just to give you what I'm thinking, in terms of a TRE, right now, today, I'm really not thinking that November of this year. I'm more comfortable in waiting until 2013. But I am open to waiting until August when we have more information and possibly considering it. But from the things that we know today, I'm just not ready to commit to November of 12. I just don't think the timing is right. And I do agree with Mr. Torres that we really do need to keep an eye on the bond committee that we've just established. Because I agree that if we've asked them to do all this work, then we're really going to have to set that timeline as to when they get their report to us and then what we're going to do with that report. So it's just something that we need to keep on our radar. And I do support the proposed expenditure budget for next year.
Okay, thank you. Can I follow up on that? Because I was going to say it earlier, but it seems like a good segue. On page 31, the table 16, that's the TRE projected revenue scenarios. Page 31 in the budget book. It's table 16, and it's got the status quo, 4 cent, 5 cents, 6 cents. If we could get a similar chart based on everything I know it's rough guess, about what the bond implications would be. If we got 1 cent, 2 cent, 3 cent, 4 cent, how much bonding could that potentially equate to?
So,
if you know.
So Trustee Williams, let me just be clear. So are you suggesting that what would be the tax rate impact of various bond programs at various levels, like
Yep.
maybe 350 and 500?
Yeah, I went,
That's
that
what-
may work. I wouldn't say, if you had 1 cent, how much would that give us? 2 cents? But either way, if it's 100, 200, 300, 400 million, what would the tax implications? I'm okay going either way.
Well, that's part of what we're going to be presenting to the Joint Task Force, assuming that utilizing the most recent projections that we've gotten from the chief appraiser, the bond, we know what the out-year impact would be to the tax rate based upon $350 million and a $500 million scenario for AISD. I would like to talk to the board about some possible options to sort of, in some cases, we could move forward without a necessarily impact on the tax rate, assuming that the growth is materialized, on the appraisal value growth actually is realized. With some new updated, so we've updated our schedules. It could be a tax rate impact in maybe 2014, 2015, but we could defease some debt, utilizing one-time allotments from reserves to sort of maintain that tax rate and not necessarily change the tax rate. So I know it's very
understand what you're
confusing
saying.
at this time. But there may not be an incremental tax rate increase, assuming that the appraisal values grow at the assumed levels that have been provided recently by the chief appraiser. And so we ran those scenarios, and we will provide those scenarios to the Bond Advisory Committee, and it will be part of the presentation to the Joint Task Force.
And we could also get it to the board, because I'm trying to go as a little bit of the city's calculation. I think they had, I'm ballparking, $400 million that they could go without raising taxes based on the current expectation of growth and existing tax base and the existing tax rate. And so I think we might have a pretty, back to the bond question of how much could we go for with what tax impact, and that might actually impact our sequencing of when we might go ask for 2 cents versus when we might go ask for 5 cents, because to the taxpayer, we might look at it as M&O or INS, but to them, it's just an increase in the tax rate. And so it doesn't really matter to them. It impacts our ability to operate, but the tax impact to them is the same. Mr. Torres?
But I think they'll still perceive it as a tax increase.
Absolutely, it's a tax increase no matter what. I'm just saying, but to them, it's a tax increase equal no matter what.
Right.
For us, it has very different economic impact.
Right. Ms. Abrams, can you tell me, as far as a healthcare district, are they under the same requirements that we are as to when they have to declare that they're going out for a change in tax rate?
Yeah, they still have to get their tax rate approved by their board, and they have to go out for the election program and for if they wanted to go out and issue bonds and what have you. I believe their time frame is August. I'm actually looking for, I asked if we can get some definitives around those dates. But I think in August, I think is when they have to make those decisions, if I'm not mistaken. But I don't know definitively.
And do those require voter approval, or are they more like the city, they can increase a certain amount without?
Oh, you mean the operating, I'm sorry.
Yeah, right.
The operating. I don't know. I'd have to, let me get back to you on that one.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Okay, we move back to Dr. Starfin. What you're saying is, I think we want to look at approval of expenditure budget. I think the board will need to address the historical property tax exemption question to give guidance to the public about that. And I think we ought to defer making a decision on a TRE until August. I don't think, at least my sense is, I'm not sure we're prepared next Monday to make a definitive decision, given what we know. And for me, if someone said, forced to make a decision next week, I'm going to say no. But I think I'd rather wait till August because of the calendar, and also there's just be a lot more information. So does everyone comfortable with that as an approach? Okay, let's go with that.
Can I just add that you would have to make the decision by August 6th, the day that we publish the tax rate in the newspaper?
So we come back on the 6th, have a meeting, and we have to decide that day. Ms. Schneider?
Do we have to publish anything before the tax rate is published with like an intent to raise the tax?
Yes. On August 6th, you're scheduled to take action on the publication that goes into the newspaper, and that has to be publicized 10 days before the hearing.
Okay, I'm sorry, I misunderstood you. saying that August 6th, I took it as August 6th was the date that it would be published versus the date that we have to approve for publication.
You approve for publication.
Thank you.
And so let's be clear. We could take action on this, I'm making up numbers, right? But we could take action on the 6th to publish a tax rate that's 5 cents higher than what we have today, and then ultimately still not do that. If the feedback and the public, we could decide later to come at a lower rate. We just can't go higher than the rate we publish in the paper.
Correct.
On the 6th. So the board has to give direction on the 6th of what rate to publish for purposes of the public hearing and ultimate adoption of the budget at the end of August.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Nicole and Michael, thank you enormously for all your work on this very tough landscape on both budget and human capital in the world we live in today. Okay, we've got a couple items
Yes.
on updates, and we need to make sure, and you're going to
Yes,
greet
we're ready.
our new addition, eh?
Yes, the next
Dr.
item on the agenda is the consideration of policy update 92. It's you've done these before. It's revisions to the district's policy regarding reductions in force, incorporates provisions from Senate Bill 8, in which the legislature enacted last session. Edna Butts, the district's new director of intergovernmental relations and policy oversight, is here to do the quick presentation and answer any questions you have. But these policy revisions are scheduled for action on the June 18th consent agenda. Welcome to AISD, Edna, and we'll let you jump right into it.
Okay, thank you.
We're glad to have
Can
you
I say
here.
welcome? You all may recall, as Christy Rome left us, and we just so incredibly blessed to have Edna Butts join us as the new position. She came from Senator Watson's office, and we are lucky beyond words. So thank you for being able to join us.
Thank
and
you.
it's all yours.
Thank you, I'm happy to be here. As the superintendent indicated, Update 92 includes revisions to the reduction in force policies and incorporates provisions on several cost reduction options from Senate Bill 8, which was passed during the special session in June of last year. The legal policies reflect the legal context for governance and management of the district, and as you know, they are not adopted by the board, but help inform any changes that the board makes to local policy. And there are explanatory notes in your binder that summarize what those legal policies are and also what the local policies are. There are 3 local policies that the board will be asked to take action on next week. The DFF local, which is the current policy, would be replaced by 2 policies. So DFF local is being split into DFFA local, which deals with RIFs based on financial exigency, and DFFB local, which addresses RIFs based on a program change. The policy committee has reviewed Update 92. Michael Hauser has discussed this with Education Austin, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Let's open up for comments or questions. And with the proposals, we're looking for action on this next week if the board doesn't have any direction, or if we do, either way. The intent is to take action on this on the consent agenda next Monday. Questions, comments? Ms. Moya.
Well, I don't have a question, but I have a comment. The policy committee met last week and had the opportunity to have our first meeting with Edna, and it was absolutely fabulous. The transition from one director to another is seamless. Edna's grasp on policy was as if she's been doing this all her life, and she's so modest. And so I just want to echo Mr. Williams' welcome to you
Thank you, Ms. Moya.
and the superintendents, and just say that we look forward to more work with you on the policy committee.
Thank you. I do too.
Other questions or comments? Ms. Torres, anything? Oh, okay. Is everybody comfortable with the recommendations as proposed? Again, coming from our friends at TASB and some statewide guidance. Ms. Schneider, you okay? Okay. We'll look forward to moving forward on that item
you.
on Monday. Thank you very much. Let's go to our lunch session.
We have one
Oh,
more.
I'm sorry. I missed the second one.
Mr. President, on June 1st, staff met with the board's intergovernmental committee to develop guiding principles, which represent the district's priorities for the upcoming legislative session that begins on January 8th, 2013. You have the draft document. You had the draft document back on June 1st. The revised version was prepared this Thursday. And again, Mrs. Butts is here to answer any questions you have. This is also an agenda item that will be on consent agenda. And if you have any questions, we're prepared to answer that too.
Okay, I might have gone a little too fast. So let's move to the ledge item. So I'm there. Okay, Mr. Torres.
Yes, welcome. So I figured I'd save my welcome until my opportunity, since I knew I'd have some questions. So it's a great pleasure to have you working with us, and we really look forward to
Thank you.
many, many more years with you. I have a question about the first bulleted item to try to understand what we're looking for on that particular item. That's sort of my first question. And then second, would it be worthwhile, at least sort of internally, to prioritize these in some sort of way? Because we always know that in the legislative session, you're not going to get everything that you want. And so the question is, if we were to look at these, do we already know which ones for us are the most important, and which ones for us are ones that, if we have to spend our energies on certain items, which ones are the ones that we just would not have as much time if we got drawn into other areas? So can you, one, answer my question with regard to the first bullet item, and then have we considered prioritizing these and presenting them? And once again, I'm not necessarily saying that we actually say Category 1, Category 2. I'm just saying right now, as I look at them, some of them to me are more important to us than others. And yet I don't see them that way, and so I'm wondering if our legislative staff has a priority, and how we can all get in sync on that.
The answer to your first question about the first bullet, what we did is we took the principles that the board adopted for the 82nd legislative session, and the first bullet in that document was to provide flexibility to allow school districts to prioritize spending and guard against any new unfunded mandates or infringements upon local control. And so the committee and others we consulted, such as Christy Rome and Janice Carter, who's our legislative consultant, believe that we should leave that bullet in there but break it up into two separate bullets. I believe that most school districts want flexibility to prioritize their spending. So I don't know what went into the thinking when this was adopted last session. So
I guess maybe a question that might help me clarify this, if we were to say, okay, give me 3, examples of where we don't have, the ability to prioritize our spending. What would those be, so that if we say get rid of this one, or change the law so that we don't have to spend money here, we can take that money and spend it as we wish. That might help me understand which items we're really trying to address in this particular area.
Well, what we'll do after the board adopts the guiding principles is to have a more detailed document. I believe that probably will come in around September. I didn't bring the document from last session. I don't have it with me. That might give a little more guidance, and I'm happy to follow up with you on what that looks like.
Okay. Right.
And then the second question was whether we should prioritize, and that's obviously up to the board if you want to prioritize some of these bullet items.
I guess I would suggest that we probably should, if there's some sequence that we think would make sense, that I think would be helpful, so people understand this. I'm going to even suggest, maybe this may not be a structure, which is maybe one category of school finance, and there's another of accountability. And then within the school finance, there's a funding element, a flexibility element, and a formula element. And somehow just maybe even a grouping, because most of the funding, most of them, not all of them, are about restoring funding making sure that they restore funding for cuts, or they fund pre-K, they fund the cuts that they made last session, that they refund the date. That's different than some of the funding formulas where we're asking for update the funding formulas for Social Security, and there's also two other items, probably the cost of education. I'm going back to Ms. Moya said, the cost of education index, and probably the weights for students, because those three are probably all things that we as one district are going to be underserved by the formulas the way they're currently constructed, and probably not giving proper weights that they don't take into consideration. Social Security, cost of education in Austin is much higher than other districts relatively over the past 20 years, and our student mix has caused us to probably have a greater need, and the weights have probably been adjusted for some of the higher need at-risk students. And then maybe, so those were the three, somehow some structure about funding, flexibility, and formulas, and then an accountability subset, which is mostly for the last one. But as we have other principles that come up, we might look at that. Just some way to get some grouping and then some prioritization within that. And then maybe some guidance from you and Casey about what's the most likely to resonate. Because we may say the first one is to get the $5.4 billion back, but that may be the least
Right.
likely to happen. So which ones can we potentially make the case for that we want to sequence that are more practical? And I don't have a great sense of that, but I'm certainly open to a sequencing. It may still be bullet points. I wouldn't put them 1, 2, 3, 4, but just in terms of the way they read.
I guess I'm just thinking about trying to be strategic in terms of resources and as you indicated, reality check. But I guess it's also helpful to understand what are our priorities in terms of which of these items are most important to this district. And just sort of laying all of them out there, at least since I've been on the board, we sort of do this every 2 years, but when push comes to shove, we end up focusing on just a few of them anyway because of the way the legislature's going. So I guess I'm sort of trying to think about that in advance and say, I think for us, those items that can provide us funding, to me, seem like more critical than some of the accountability issues, perhaps. But that's the kind of discussion I think we should have, is to say, okay, is restoring funding to pre-K what I think everybody here would say, that if we can get that done, that's going to be a biggie for us.
Yeah.
So working hard to get that one is more important than flexibility, because flexibility is going to take a lot of working to change policies and a whole lot more steps that have to be, navigated in order to accomplish that. And so, given this session, do we think that will actually happen? So, I guess it's a matter of being strategic with regard to the priorities that we as a board have.
I think the challenge is somewhat that we have, that, even though the funding is more important, in this session, they may completely punt on funding because of the school finance litigation. So you might have a greater chance of getting something that's not funding, that's either accountability or it's flexibility. They may do something that doesn't cost any money because they're going to wait for the litigation to decide to put it before they put a dollar system, potentially. And I don't have a great feel for that, but some may be more difficult normally, but they may be more likely because they do want to pass some legislation. But I'm going to guess there's probably not going to be a whole lot of school finance school finance legislation until the litigation is resolved. And that's probably won't be resolved till after the session, at least the first session's over. So I know a couple of hands were up. I can't remember, Ms. Moya, Mr. Schneider.
Just a note, TASB is in the process of putting the advocacy agenda together, and the priorities in the districts in the regions have already met. And flexibility is one of the top priorities of districts across the state. And the board will be voting on the advocacy agenda at the summer meeting in July, and then it'll go before the convention in October. So, I believe the information on what TASB is putting together right now is probably already available, at least in draft form to review, perhaps. Because, we might have a connection to get some of that information if it's available, to look at, just to compare it to what our priorities are or what our guiding principles are. Because we may want to, there may be something on there that we might want to substitute, perhaps. I don't know. I don't remember what they all are. I know I've seen them, but I don't remember what they all are. But I do recall in the Region 13 meeting that flexibility was one of the items that got the most attention from those school districts that attended the grassroots meeting. So, and of course, you know, the majority of those there were smaller districts. The larger districts like us in Round Rock were there, but the smaller districts were there in large numbers. So, but flexibility is a huge one.
Okay. Mr. Snyder?
Ms. Butts, just a couple of questions or suggestions, and I'm thinking about it kind of in a devil's advocate point of role, because I think I know how one side's going to react to the wording here and how the other side's going to react, and trying to make sure we don't get caught in the crosshairs as it was. On the third bullet point, if I know a lot of folks look at it as we intentionally underfunded versus cutting, and I'm wondering if there's a word we can substitute or change there just to not arouse the ire of somebody if we give them this particular document.
Another word besides cuts?
Yes.
Okay.
And on the last bullet point, I think there are those that will take issue with it's the state's emphasis on testing. I can understand how we certainly look at it and why, but you know, the counterpoint's going to be, well, the state says you have to do this test. You know, if you want to do the other ones, it's fine, it's up to you, but you have to live with consequences. So, you know, if we could somehow change that particular wording as well, just to.
Yeah, and I think that when we came before the committee on June 1st, that
30
we,
minutes, yep.
that was added
Really?
at the suggestion of one of
Do you
the
remember?
board members.
I think this was added, but we did talked about, again, the same point about the state's emphasis, and that we had to be careful, I think, Robert's point, that it's not just the state, but it was almost the state's approach, which is the punitive, accountability-driven approach.
Right.
Because the free up world-class education, that's what we want to try to do, but I think it was the approach that they take to accountability and standardized test that we would like them to moderate, which would have an impact on us. And so I do think that if we're not careful, the wording could be implied to say, well, we're not, it's our emphasis that's driving the ability. I mean, of course, you can do world-class education.
You know, I was just thinking, say, moderate the emphasis on standardized test, but, I mean, we could change it to be moderate the emphasis on standardized test, you know, punitive testing or, you know, something close to that.
And punitive accountability.
Yeah, right, to get that point across, which I completely fine with. And, I mean, out of this list, I mean, I think that last bullet point is going to be the closest thing we get to a get, and it may not be in the form that we want it, but, I mean, that's where our likely success is going to be.
Well, given the grassroots approach that the parents have had all over the state, I mean, it's not just us, right? The resolution's been passed by districts of all shapes and sizes. There's been a lot of pressure, and I think there's some people that as the end of course exams are kicking in and people are realizing their kids have to go to summer school this summer on 4 different subjects potentially to take tests, I think people are realizing the magnitude of the implications, and it's going to drive a lot of interest over the next year. Ms.
Yeah.
Torres?
Well,
Oh, sorry,
one
go
more
ahead.
thing, if I can. The first bullet point about flexibility in local schools, I mean, to me, that gets back to the same thing TASB pounds on day after day, time after time of local control of what school districts do. I mean, don't tell us what to do. Tell us what your expectations are and give us flexibility to get there, basically. Yeah. So, I mean, that's how I'm taking that. I would not disagree with, you know, citing some kind of priorities and what we expect or what we look for, but I mean, that's the takeaway I get from that particular bullet point. So.
Ms. Torres?
I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to ask Ms. Moya, when you use the term flexibility, I don't read flexibility and this first bullet the same. I thought what TASB is interested in is flexibility in terms of local control, which doesn't necessarily limit itself in terms of prioritizing spending. It's things like determining when we start school and other areas like that. That's not what this first bullet says to me. So that's why, you know, when you use the term local control, that's what I think TASB is saying. But I haven't seen what TASB says, and so I'd like clarification. When you say flexibility, are you saying for spending?
Yes, yes, it's not about the issue of when we start school. That's,
No,
I mean,
no,
that's
not-
there.
That's not what I said.
but-
What I said
but-
was local control. I was using that as an example where we determine, that type of issue. So,
No, it's not that type of an issue that's driving the flexibility piece. It's about spending, and like Robert said, tell us what you want us to do, let us figure out how to get there, don't tell us how to get there.
but that's local control, that's not spending.
And that is spending.
No,
Yes,
not necessarily.
because it could be, because it's
It could
about.
be, it could
it's
be, but
about
there are a
our
lot of other-
curriculum, how we fund it, where we put our money, what kind of programs we spend on,
But spending is just one part of it.
But this is about spending. It's not just plain old local control, big umbrella local control.
What is this? What we,
This is about prioritizing our spending.
and so I guess I would disagree that this is a priority from my perspective.
Okay.
I'm more interested in local control.
Ms. Bradley?
Mr. Torres and Ms. Moyer, would the second bullet kind of hit on what you're speaking of, Mr. Torres? Guard against any new unfunded mandates and infringements upon local
Right,
control.
yeah, that to me is more local control.
And then I would like to say that I agree with Mr. Torres as far as maybe prioritizing this. When I see restore and provide funding for districts offering high-quality full-day pre-K program as bullet number 6, to me, that does not speak to me that this is of importance. So I would like to see some priority put on some of these things that we know are of value in this district.
Okay, other thoughts or comments? Okay, I'm going to suggest, this is one of those things, I think we may approve something, but I don't think we ought to look at lock in stone, because we've got several months before the session. If TASB and others come back and we can modify it, and I'm sitting here listening to what I'm hearing the board members saying, I'm even thinking there may be another grouping, which might be almost, I think about principles versus specific things.
Yeah.
And I think we've got this principle of a high-quality full-day pre-K, which is one, but one of which is just local control. I mean, the principles we want to have as much local control as possible, which has means flexibility in how we allocate spending, how we do school days, the way we do things. We also want adequate funding, right? We want sufficient funding to be able to do the things we need to do. We need the finance formulas to be accurately reflective of the environment in which we're in. And I'm wondering if a principle, rather than moderate the state's emphasis, if that's a principle, or is that we'd like the accountability system to be formative and diagnostic rather than punitive? That it's a principle type thing as opposed to a specific thing that we're trying to do. So the principle we have is a formative and diagnostic accountability system rather than a punitive one, which is, I think, why people generally give tests, to see where you are, but then also to figure out what we need to do rather than to punish you. Okay, so this is difficult, so I'm saying, let's just go with what we'll get something next Monday, or Thursday for Monday, but understand that we're able to make changes and it evolves as we get additional feedback from other sources, being TASB or others, Region 13. And I think the Central Texas School Board Association is probably also going to pass something. Now, it's probably going to be, a collection of different districts, but I think we can evolve and keep talking about it if we need to as we make adjustments getting into the next session.
Okay, great.
Thank you for doing
Thank
this.
you. Thank
Ms.
you.
Bradley.
And I just wanted to say to Ms. Butts, welcome.
Thank
And I
you.
look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here. Okay, let's now turn, we got 2 more items. We're roughly on time, so we're actually a little bit ahead of time. Let's keep on moving. Dr. Christopher, we're talking about STAR tax, EOS end of course.
Yes, Mr. President, trustees, this past Friday, the Texas Education Agency, it was Friday, right, Bill? Yes, ma'am. Yes. Time goes by so fast here. Released the preliminary tax, end of course, and STAR results. And while our district, like other districts around the state, are still examining the results, we are trying to communicate to the public and of course, our schools, all that we know to ensure that we are continuing to make a successful transition to the STAR assessment and learning all that we can to make real-time, mid-course corrections as we enter into the summer and get ready to launch the next school year again. This past Saturday, we had an opportunity to go over some parts of the preliminary results as you prepared your work going into the fall as well to advise the district in ways that to advise the district in ways that you expect us to improve our targets, make even adjustments, and be more thoughtful about our goal statements and measuring them. So this is for y'all a continuation of the discussion, but just to kind of get the public and everyone on the same page with us, so we don't, lose everybody in the process. Bill Carich, our Chief Performance Officer, is going to run through the presentation again, just one more time, kind of high level, and then turn it back over so we can continue our discussion. And some of the questions we talked about, Bill Carich and I have been working on since I saw you at the retreat, and we have some thinking that we'd love to get your reaction to as well on some of the highlighted questions. But I'll turn it over to you, and you can turn to your tab behind the agenda item, and the PowerPoint is there for you to follow along.
Good evening.
Welcome.
Thank you. Again, I'm going to move fairly quickly since you have seen this and try to leave as much time.
Is your mic on?
Yes.
Oh.
And I'll try to leave as much time as I can for questions. As you know, we're going to talk about the preliminary STAR data that we don't know a lot about, but we're going to tell you what we do know. We're going to talk about the preliminary end of course exam data and the tax grade 10 and 11, particularly focusing on the exit exam, which is still a requirement for graduation this year. As you will recall, that the new end of course exam has 3 levels: advanced, satisfactory, and unsatisfactory. And within unsatisfactory, there are actually 2 levels. You can be unsatisfactory but meet the minimum score. We've talked about that in addition to the different requirements about cumulative scores and the number of tests you have to pass and so forth. A little bit more about the phase-in of the end-of-course exams. This slide just simply highlights for you that there will be a 3-phase phase-in. The first phase will be for this year and next year. The second phase will be for 14-15, and then the final phase is 2016. And you can see bolded there in the middle, we have highlighted for you the level 3 for English 3 reading, English 3 writing, and Algebra 2. And those are the only level 3 performance data that will be phased in, and that's because it's tied to the diploma, the distinguished diploma. Again, a little bit more about the phase-in. This gives you a good sense of the reality on slide 5, a good sense of the reality of the phase-in. On the left-hand side, we've given you the English 1 reading phase-in for the initial and then final standard. You can see the initial phase-in cut score for meeting the standard is 30 out of 56. And then the final, and this is one of the higher standards that was set, the 2 highest cut scores that were set by the state this year for the phase-in, initial phase-in were for reading and writing. And you can see the initial phase-in for reading is 30 out of 56, and the final is 36 out of 56. So you can see there's a relatively small jump between the initial phase-in and the final. And then on the right-hand side, you can see, in contrast, a lower standard on the phase-in for Algebra 1, 20 out of 54, but a much bigger jump between the initial phase-in and the final, which is 34 out of 54. So that's what that slide is trying to show. Again, on the phase-in, most of you have already seen this. For the level 2 initial phase-in, the lowest standards were for Algebra 1 and biology.
And this is slide 6.
This is slide 6. And then the highest was for writing, where it's almost at the final cut score. So the phase-in for English 1 writing was 65% of the items correct. And as a result, as I think you know, there was a big impact on performance. For writing, the percentage of kids meeting the standard was much lower than for any other subject, and that's simply because the state set the bar for English much higher than they did for math, science, or social studies. And so here's the initial phase 1 level, the level 2 satisfactory results. You can see, for example, that when we combine middle school and high school Algebra 1 data, 83% of the students met the satisfactory level 2 standard. And you may notice on the press release that we changed this to 84, and that's because we took out linguistically accommodated students over the weekend, realizing that the state, when the state put their data out, they did not include the linguistically accommodated. So if you'll see a slight difference between the press release and this slide, it's because Algebra 1 went up 1 percentage point and World Geography went up 1 percentage point when we took the linguistically accommodated students out. And again, you can see here that, I mean, the real story this year for the phase-in of the end-of-course exam is that they set the bar fairly low, 1 standard deviation below the final cut score in Algebra 1 and biology, and as a result, we had large numbers of students meet that standard. Conversely, where they set the bar quite high, as in writing, we had a much smaller number, 54%, meet that standard. I guess I should note here that as a result of where the state put the writing cut score, we have over 2,000 students who will have to retake the writing test because they did not meet the minimum unsatisfactory score. 2,000. And again, we expect that to be a phenomena across the state. Large numbers of students not meeting the writing standard. This is level 2. And again, you know, we have about 20% of the students, I'm sorry, level 3, we had about 20% of the students reach the level 3. This is the final cut for Algebra 1 and for World Geography. And you'll recall last year that for the commended levels, we were at 30% in all subject areas for the first time. So we're not quite back to the 30%, but not a bad start in Algebra 1 and World Geography. Again, this is the final level 3 standard. This is, I know there was some concern about this over the weekend, so just to be really clear, for example, in the far right where you see geometry, and somehow another text got overlapped here. There was 1,063 high school students this year in 9th grade, or in some cases 8th graders. I'm sorry, this is just high school, 9th grade, who took geometry. Obviously, those are kids who took Algebra 1 when they were in middle school. So these are advanced students in mathematics, and 100% of them met the phase-in level 2 standard, and a large percentage of them, 90%, met the final level 3 standard in geometry. So, you know, I think there was concern that maybe this wasn't, that this was confusing, but again, these are advanced kids in geometry. We just wanted to give you the full picture. Students have been notified if they did not meet the minimum standard. Summer school starts tomorrow. So we will be offering free end-of-course prep camps starting tomorrow at Bowie and Anderson high schools. The next retest will be in December. In regard to tax, just quickly, grade 10 was a challenge for us this year because we're trying to turn our attention to the end-of-course exams. This is not a graduation requirement for these 10th graders. And so while we were trying to turn our attention to the end-of-course exams for 10th grade so that next year as the 9th graders transition up to 10th grade, we're ready for them in terms of being prepared for the end of course, At the same time, they had to take tax. Conversely, the exit level grade 3, grade 11 results, you can see we actually improved by 3 percentage points in science. We stayed the same in social studies and went up 1 percentage point in math and went down 1 percentage point in English language arts. And again, this is a graduation requirement. As a result, we have 345 students this year in the class of 2012 who did not meet all of the state testing requirements that still exist. And again, many of these students also didn't meet the course requirements, but so in many cases they didn't meet either the course requirement or the testing requirement. But here it just outlines for you that there's a significant number of kids, as there has been in the past, who don't meet all the state testing requirements for graduation. With regard to STAR in 3 through 8, we don't know a lot. The state has not released summary data at the state level, but we are certainly using the data internally to make lots of decisions about curriculum development this summer. I've given you just a sample for grade 5. This is totally hypothetical, but our team, our accountability team, has been massaging the data for some time and in trying to anticipate what our STAR data might look like for 3 through 8, depending on various cut scores. And you can see a sample of that in slide 19. In terms of accountability, as you know, the ratings were frozen for this year, so we will not be getting new state accountability ratings. However, and I know this was a big question over the weekend, there will be new federal AYP ratings, and that will be based on the 10th grade tax, which we just talked a little bit about, which still is in place. And then in July and August, we will receive from TEA reading and math tax with the results of the bridging study for 3 through 8. So we will have the same tax comparisons that we've had in the past for reading and math. And it's the only real comparisons we'll have from this year to last year. Only in reading and math, 3 through 8 and 10, that's required under No Child Left Behind. So we will still have a lot of comparative data in terms of the strategic plan for reading and math only. As I just said, the preliminary data will be in early July. We are expecting campus ratings and AYP to be in early August. We will have, when the state does finally give us the final data, which we're not anticipating until January 2013, we'll obviously be able to compare campuses. We'll be able to compare ourselves to the state. And then through some of the statistical things we're doing with REACH, we'll have some other fairly, I think, useful comparisons to share with you. 2012-13, the next year they will phase in the acceptable and unacceptable ratings. The following year they will phase in the exemplary and recognized ratings for the first time under the new system. And then we can talk about next steps. We're focusing a great deal in curriculum. We're adding a lot of model lessons, and we're with a particular focus for a dramatic increase in the number of model lessons that help us differentiate instruction for English language learners as well as students with disabilities. We can talk more about that, but I'll stop here and take your questions. And I should add, I know Carolyn Hanchin is behind me, and I just mentioned that, as you know, we have a great accountability team. They work, this time of year, they work long days. They work weekends. Carolyn and I have been working all weekend with the superintendent, and these are 3 of the great people. We have a lot of great people in AISD. This is a particularly outstanding team led by Carolyn, who's back here on my left.
So thanks to Carolyn, Deborah, and Diane for all of their work. And as you said, you work long days, but that really means long days and nights, because it's you're
Yes, sir.
here when it's dark, as you are tonight. So thank you for putting this together. And I know it doesn't end because there's a lot of information still to come. Let's open it up for comments or questions. Ms. Torres.
Mr. Greach, I just have one engineering type of question. Why is it that on the raw score and the scale score, why do they not start the scale score at 0?
Well, in theory, they do. I mean, it has a 0 point, but we don't have any students. Fortunately, we don't have any students who score anywhere near the 0 point. But yeah, theoretically, there is a 0 point.
But I mean, if you had a raw score of 0, the scale score is 653. So if you got none of them right, you still get 653 points. Why is that?
Yeah, so they start with a z-score that has a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1, and then they force it to have some other distribution other than a mean of 0. Yeah, so that's a purely mathematical manipulation on their part. But there really is a 0 point if you look behind the numbers.
So what you asked was an engineering question. You got a statistician answer, which is who knows?
We don't speak the same language.
Yeah, it's 1 0 and 1 653. It's like, it is confusing. Other questions or comments? Okay, I know there's a lot of work to be done. You guys are going to do a lot of analysis. You got to figure out what the implications are for curriculum and instruction. I'm going to suggest, and the board can agree or disagree with this, is that as you go through and do this, you're probably going to get more information about what you might need or not need, and the programs and plans that we have in place may or may not be enough to meet the needs, given what we find out. So if you need to come back with additional requests for support in this time of transition, because next year we're obviously moving to campus accountability, but we have kids now for which this is individual accountability, and we need to make sure they get the supports they need. So if you have what you need, great, but if you need more, please don't hesitate to come back. You know, this is really important. Ms. Schneider.
This is like past all this. I'll wait to the very end. Go ahead.
My question was just, for the kids that are going to have to take the test this summer, they're already enrolled, is that correct?
Yeah, are they? Because
Summer
everything
school
is
starts
starting, yeah.
tomorrow. We'll have a better count tomorrow on how many kids have signed up for the end-of-course prep camp and are trying to get ready to retake the test.
Okay. And since it's summer and folks are moving around and doing other things, what are the provisions for kids having to take this test? I mean, do they actually have to be here in Austin to take it? Can they take it somewhere else? Can they?
It's my understanding that they don't have to be here in Austin. They can take it somewhere else. If they register, they can take it somewhere else in the state.
Okay, in attendance during the summer at the courses that they would be reviewing to take these tests again?
I'm sorry, I didn't follow your question.
Okay, is the attendance in the summer school courses that they are going to be doing the review for taking the test again, is that required or?
No.
Okay, so
We're
it has to be.
strongly encouraging them, particularly if they didn't meet the minimum standard, we're strongly encouraging them to come to the summer camp, but it is not required.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, they could be enrolled in the course, but don't have to come, but just to take the test again, is that right?
Well, we'll give them the test whether they come to summer camp or not. I mean, yeah.
All right, thanks.
Other questions or comments? Let me follow up on something you said. So when you look at your page, your slide 5, and you referred to the passing score, what was the minimum score? You know, where I guess there's some level that says that they have to take it again if they don't get the minimum score. But because of the aggregation of all the scores, if they meet the minimum, some tests they may be above the minimum but not full passing, but then they can compensate by passing at a higher rate on some other test. Is there a way to know what the minimum score is for which they're required to have to take the test
We can
again?
certainly provide that to you, a table of all the minimum cut scores for each subject area.
Yeah, I think it'd just be helpful to understand, and if I think about writing, and 54% of the people, of the students pass, which means 46% are going to potentially might have to take it again, but I'm not sure how many of that actually didn't even meet the minimum and therefore will be required to take it again. And what happens if they don't take it? You know, they're out of town, they're on vacation, this was summer, they weren't planning on being there.
My recollection from this afternoon is that there are approximately 2,300 kids who did not meet the minimum score.
On all tests?
In one or more tests. And that's largely being driven by writing, where the state chose to implement a very rigorous initial phase-in.
And how many administrations of the retakes will there be?
Oh, but there'll be several between now and the time of the graduation. I think there's 2 next year. Yeah, December and May of next year.
Okay, so they don't have to necessarily, I guess I was trying to get to, is they don't necessarily have to take it during the summer if they've got, because some of these kids may already
That's
be
correct.
committed during the summer, they got jobs, they got what other stuff. But they will, but then next year, they're going to have to pass the retake of the test that they didn't get the minimum on, while at the same time passing whatever the next year's class is. So they.
That's correct.
A lot of testing. Okay. Other comments or questions? Okay, thank you, Bill. A lot of work to you and your team. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Okay, one more item, folks.
Oh, can I just give one little question?
Yes, please.
Who asked, like, does the scale score go to 0? Who asked that? That
Vince.
was you? It does. Bill, do you want to explain that? That it actually, oh, you did?
Well,
It
the raw
actually
score goes to
can.
0, but the skills,
That one too.
No, I missed it. You asked that earlier on the TV thing? Oh, I missed that.
Yes, I mean, if you
Sorry.
think of the SAT that has a minimum score of, I think, of 200 or 300 and a maximum score of 800, that also has a 0 point, but they mathematically manipulate it so it has a different scale.
everybody gets a trophy.
Sorry.
Okay,
You were so compelling.
blinded by his appearance. Okay, so,
The retreat's
Dr.
over. You
Gerstoffen.
came. We don't have to continue. And the last agenda for discussion, I'm sorry, yes, item on the agenda for discussion tonight, did you start the time?
I did.
Is regarding the potential proposal for 2 single-gender middle schools in District 1. As you may recall, last year in the fall or over the summer, like when we started the summer, we started looking at the annual academic and facility recommendations for potential implementation for 12-13. This was one of the items or one of the proposals that it was being considered during that time frame. It in the December timeframe when we started leading up to action, it was put in the 13-14 timeframe, but had a lot of background work on it that fall, and then ultimately we've continued a lot of community conversations led primarily with Trustee Bradley in the community with different stakeholder groups to explore the potential of this model. And the model would be, you know, taking the two attendance areas for Pearson Garcia, making it 1, and then considering a split in and how all that would work is our details, you know, we haven't figured out just yet. But the concept is that boys would be in one side, girls would be at the other, but it would still be an attendance area driven school design. I know that Ms. Bradley has been working very closely with the community to try to weigh and vet the concept, but also to weigh the interest in the design. In your materials tonight, what we've done is summarize for you the background of kind of all the work that's been going on, particularly even starting at the beginning of this school year. It's summarized in all the background materials, but as we've led up to the end of this school year, there are still meetings going on. We have some, you know, some are scheduled with some of our law enforcement, neighborhood associations. We continue to work with the faith community, parents, and so on. So while we've done a lot of work, there's still work that we are working our way through. However, we are at a point in, you know, here at the end of the school year where your last potential action meeting, again, is June 18th. And Ms. Bradley has talked to you all, has talked to me, and is here tonight to share some of her personal experiences, talking to the community as well. But there was discussion about you know, the design, particularly as we've been working with the Moody proposal, that's the other single-gender potential design, but where we learned some lessons about kicking off Ann Richards' school, single-sex school. And at the heart of that was, you know, making decisions at points where, you know, we felt comfortable enough to be able to get a leg up on finalizing, planning, and shaping proposals for a school. Because the Moody proposal is a grant that isn't coming out of our general fund, we have far more flexibility to do things like hire extra staff early to work on a design without having made a permanent decision about whether or not we're going to start a school with a potentially different structure. In the case of these two schools, you know, we don't have the flexibility with those dollars. And, you know, as we end this school year and start the other, there is, you know, the summer, probably 4 or 5 months that can be lost, if you will. But, you know, if we are not thinking about some of the best practice lessons learned in launching the Ann Richards School, which involved some early decision-making around doing the design so that, you know, we could plan more thoughtfully. And the question we had, because we are sort of at a point where there's been a lot of vetting, there are still some questions, admittedly so, that haven't been fully answered, but it is posted for guidance regarding any consideration of action that this board may or may not want to consider for June 18th. What that looks like, how that might be shaped is, of course, your decision, but there is there are a lot of details in this that could be of benefit to this area, if very much so like the LBJ Reagan decision 2 years ago at the end of the school year. We didn't technically launch. You know, we knew that we didn't have a contract with ACC. We knew that there was a lot of things we still needed to work out, but that we had some general active decision-making by the board that kind of blessed us doing it. And if it didn't work out, we could, you know, like if ACC said, we're not going to approve a contract for early college high school with you, we would have had to go back and relook at things. But is this something, you know, that y'all feel like you want to consider now and give us guidance on? I'll stop there and just point you to the PowerPoint, which has, you know, with every, you know, meeting we have, we get feedback from the people we present to, and they give us a lot of guidance on ways that we can improve how we're talking to parents in particular about this. We've included, you know, an approach to what this really means for our students, some potential elements of the academic design, which is on slide 7, page 8 of your PowerPoint. We broke down the parts of the day and the design that could make the school stronger. If you look on slide 13, page 14, there's even like a sample schedule. As we've been out learning through the Moody Foundation resources about single-sex schools, we've been taking that and applying that information to the potential, to the design that we still would need to, you know, spend time with the community developing. And that does take a lot of time. And I guess our concern is, you know, as we lead up into the budget conversations, and we do need the community to help advise us on the kind of school designs that they want, that's what we keep hearing from them, then, you know, it's, the timeline is getting a little tricky for us to manage. But, you know, we've talked about school dress codes and teacher recruitment, including the research that's for and against single-sex education. That goes for a few pages, I think slides 18 through 20 or something. But once you get to the end of the presentation, it gives you a sense of the different models there are out there, but we specifically highlighted toward the end of the, as one of the attachments, some of the designs of other public schools. And in this case, Columbus Public Schools has both a boys and a girls school that we're following more closely to understand a little bit more about their design. But we put both of those in there toward the end so you can see them. But like I've said, we've seen a lot of other sites as well. And we also included, while not statistically significant, every time we present to a community group or parents or telephone surveys, we collect that, and our performance office does a really nice job of, keep adding them together in bits and pieces for us to get a sense of what our stakeholders are saying. But we put after page 32, again, the annual facility, the annual academic and facility recommendation structure that summarized it from last year. We keep updating and improving our various, iterations of this. But we wanted to show you basically where we are. This could be a decision point for the board to give us more specific guidance about, making it more structured. But if you were going to do that, I would certainly need to know to ensure that we prepare an appropriate agenda item for next Monday or August or September or whatever y'all decide. And then I'll just stop and ask Ms. Bradley if there's anything else you wanted to add to, your experience in leading this in your district.
First of all, I'd like to say, just by listening to the past presentation as we looked at STARS and the results from it and so forth and so on, and we look at the results that we've had from both middle school, Pierce and Garcia, and we know that both schools have been low performing in the past, and I would say are probably low performing now. These two schools both feed into LBJ and Reagan. And when you have those type of statistics going into it, it's kind of hard for you to believe that you're going to have a large deal of success. So I really believe that these two designs are critical to the success of LBJ and Reagan, but also to the success of those students. If you look at those two schools, and if we probably had the course curriculum for both schools, I don't believe that you would see an advanced academic class in there. I do not believe that you would see Algebra 1. I do not believe that you would see geometry. I do not believe that you would see other electives that some of our other middle schools have the opportunity to take. I believe that we have to structure a curriculum at those schools. We have to take out some of the distractions of those schools. I believe that we need to educate, we have to ensure that our boys are motivated to come to school and to actually get the education that's needed so that they can be successful. I think that we have a pipeline to prison going on for some of our kids, especially some of our boys of color. And I believe that we can eradicate that by doing that with these two schools, at least in this community. I believe that it's going to take something different as we look at how we deliver education in those communities. And I believe that as we continue to go on and we look at the way state accountability is becoming more rigorous and more challenging, that we're going to have to change the way that we do things, and that's how we deliver education. And I'm sitting here not to beg you or plead with you. I feel that we are at the crossroad where we have to make a change. I believe that we have no choice if we plan on saving actually a race of people, and Latino and African American males. And as we look at teenage, some of the behaviors that are happening in some of our schools, and even some of our communities, I believe that we're going to have to do something bold and courageous to try to change some of those behaviors so that we can have a stellar academic program and that teachers can deliver curriculum in the manner that it should be. And I believe that we can do that. But I believe it's going to take the wherewithal of this board willing to just step out and be bold. And the other thing I can truly say that there is quite a bit of support for both programs. And then there's some that's not supportive of it, but it still comes back to the board wanting to be bold and do what's in the best interest of children. I do want to move forward with the support of parents because I believe that there are some things that we can do to change the game and the face of education for our boys and our girls. One of the things that I do remember is when I went to see at Bettercheck Middle School in the summer. They separate out by gender. And I had the opportunity, and I may have said this before, to speak to the boys and the girls. And I think the most interesting thing that I heard from the girls is that they actually liked being, as what someone has said, segregated because the drama was taken out of it. And I had one young lady give me an example. She said that they had been there all summer and that there had not been one argument, not one fight. She felt that she had learned more in that span of that summer curriculum. She had learned more in that summer than she had the entire school year. And she believed that it was because the distraction had been removed. And you could actually go into the classroom and you can just see the difference. And it was just totally amazing. And I think that we're going to have to do something to give our kids a leg up. And I just think in this community, that would be it. We can implement a dress code. And of course, I'm one of those people that believe especially with children, that if you look good, you feel good. And if you feel good, you do good. And when we went to Chicago and we saw Chicago Urban Prep, and you could see those kids in the blazers and the ties, and the dress code was all the way down to their feet, no athletic shoes. And it was amazing. And these kids were standing there tying Windsor knots. These weren't clip-on ties. They had to know how to tie a tie. And this was throughout the school. And you could actually see the camaraderie between their classmates, where they supported each other, and it was amazing. And one of the other things that I think is more important is that we have a lot of divisiveness on our campus. And I think that we're at the point where we need to look at things culturally and also look at how similar we are instead of thinking that we're so different. And I believe that we could actually do something in these schools where the camaraderie is almost fraternal. And the same way, not fraternal for girls, but it's a sorority feel that we are supportive of each other. And I believe that we can have that. And I believe that once we see something change, we can see kids becoming engaged in their education. And one of the things that I was saying, I don't want to continue to talk because it could sound like I'm just rambling on, is that I believe that every parent wants to see their children successful. Every parent wants to see the best for their children. And I believe even the drug addict want to see the best for their children. But there are some things that they may have, that just some demons that they have that's just not helping them get there. And I believe, I know that in some of our communities, our children are facing those demons. And a lot of them are on their own. And I believe that in some cases it's going to be up to us to ensure that they understand that the situation that they're in is just a situation. And education can help them overcome that situation. And I just believe that this is just a win-win situation. So those are all my I believes.
Thank you. Okay. Yep.
Thing that I did ask, I did ask that we look at moving this up from December, and I would like to have it, I would like to see a vote on it by the end of June, which may not be feasible, so maybe even August, but where we could have a design committee and the community, along with the district, develop a philosophy. And the reason I say a philosophy by which you would hire the principal, and a philosophy by which you would hire your teachers. If you go into most successful schools, even charter schools, what you see is a philosophy, and it's ingrained in what they do in that school. And I believe sometimes that's what we are missing. We have people who believe that they have high expectations, but when you start looking at the level of work, there are no expectations there. So, I just believe that we have to change the way we do things, and it would give administration time to look at hiring staff, or at least a principal, and then a design committee is formed so that we could so that we would implement the best program that there is.
Ms. Moya.
Thank you. What I like about this concept is that it's attendance zone driven, and it's not a lottery like the Ann Richards School is. While the Ann Richards School is very successful, and I've heard the same kind of stories that Cheryl heard from the girls at Ann Richards, and it's all about the distractions and all about that stuff. And at the beginning, there was a lot of grumbling about the standardized dress, but they're not grumbling anymore. And they're really happy in that environment, and they're blossoming, and they're doing some amazing work over there, and you see it. You see the diversity in that school, and those kids, while those kids may have been some of the higher achievers, because of the way the structure is designed for admittance to Ann Richards, they still were experiencing the same issues in elementary school and middle school that any other child is, regardless of what their academic ability is or isn't. So, and I think what you end up with is young women who have a lot of confidence in themselves and believe in themselves, and so when they go to a high school that is co-ed, that they're going to be able to resist some of those things that they otherwise may not. And there's plenty of studies and research on teen pregnancy and things like that, that a situation, an academic environment like this could definitely help those girls learn how to not, look for what they need in a relationship and find it within themselves. So I'm really excited about the possibility of doing this. One thing to remember is that when it's attendance zone driven, you don't have any skimming. So, it's every child in that attendance zone goes to those schools. If they choose to go, I would imagine if there were families who decide that their middle schooler would rather have a co-ed environment, they can transfer to another program or another school somewhere. So. I think I agree with Ms. Bradley, it's a win-win for our kids. Our minority children need help from us, and I think that we're obligated to do that and give them the best environment for learning that we possibly can. I do believe that we're going to have families from other parts of the district, particularly in South and South Central Austin, maybe even North Central Austin, that are going to want to participate in a program like that. And so I don't know what kind of offering we're going to have or what our options are going to be to admit kids from other parts of town who want that same type of an environment. And if it proves to be successful, what are we going to do in the future to make sure that those opportunities are available to more children than just in one attendance zone? So because I just really do believe that the desire is there. I mean, when you see parents choosing to go to charter schools, they have standardized dress, it's single sex, they choose those for a reason, because they believe that's what's in the best interest of their child. And I just really believe that we need to have those offerings available to our students here in AISD, rather than leaving that open for charter schools to take advantage of those desires that families have. But to your point about the tie, I think a couple of years ago I mentioned the soccer team at Webb, and how that maybe it was a year ago, 2 years ago probably, and their soccer coach required them, the boys soccer coach required them on game day to wear a tie and dress shoes and a belt, to school, and it made a significant difference in those kids, to the point that those boys were opening the doors for girls, and the girls were shocked because they didn't know how to act, and then, and after the football players got done making fun of them, they realized that, they needed to either get on the bandwagon or be quiet, and so, but what you saw was a school that had been struggling and had gang issues and all these other things. You had some students who were successful soccer players who were in gangs, who were wearing a coat and tie on game day, and they weren't punching somebody in the nose because they made fun of them. They just said something like, well, we're winning, you didn't. And, and it also all of a sudden started changing the culture at that school just because they were wearing a tie. And the girls saw those boys differently. Girls that normally wouldn't have talked to those kids, we're talking to those kids. And so all of a sudden it's like, different, a whole new world was opening up to them. A whole new world. I didn't mean to say that. A whole new world, yeah. Anyway, you had to be there, sorry. So I'll stop now, and as we chuckle and go on. But yes, I agree with you. So whenever we're ready to vote, if we want to vote next Monday, I'm good.
Ms. Barstow.
Thank you. Dr. Christopherson, you mentioned some lessons learned from launching Ann Richards. Could you just share a little bit more about that? Kind of
Right, Mr. President.
good,
Trustee
bad, and
Ward.
different?
Yeah, Trustee Barksdale. And it's more of our collection of information. The great thing about working on the Moody Grant while we were considering this is that there is a committee of people of stakeholders that are working on the potential Moody design. So they are doing a lot of, extra study and research and anecdotal and otherwise that allows us to, kind of double dip and use it as we think through this design too. But some of the things that, that we saw and heard was, one, like there is a committee of stakeholders, that support the idea, that are helping drive some of the vetting process, asking good questions, helping raise resources for some of the things as well. That as we discussed, having the opportunity to hire the leadership, do a long, good search, ensure that we get the right leader for the designs, and give that leader time which is what we typically do in AISD. You're the existing principal trying to run the school, do the job, and then do some big program change at the same time. And so it would, the leader and their team and some of the people that they're able to work with, they have time to really dedicate in advance of any kind of launch, really getting, as Ms. Bradley talked about, the philosophy down, being painstakingly detailed and thoughtful about the curriculum, taking the time to be able to, become a little bit of the face and the driver of meeting with parents one-on-one, or really getting into detailed questions and finessing and shaping things throughout the process. There were certainly lessons about like even the facility itself, how you're actually going to put it together so that the building supports the academic design. Something like, naming is still a big issue. There are a lot of details about our context and things that are important to the people of Austin that take extra time, and it's sometimes board action to make happen, but without doing all of that, with the additional lead time, and we learned a lot about the last AAFRs as well. I suspect that when I finish with my work group this summer, they're probably going to have some recommendations on how we can improve our framework even. But we're just learning a lot about, taking more time and allowing for that capacity to be built to make the program successful. So those are just some highlights that I think are important that, we're applying to the way we're doing our work with the Moody grant. But in the case of this design, it won't get the same benefit of all the extra legwork that we know we're putting in the Moody piece, but we aren't allowing for in this design. And like I said, at the end of the day, if it doesn't all come together, we don't always have to launch. I mean, it can be, okay, after careful consideration, this isn't the direction we're going to go in, and we're able to call it in time for there not to be any massive disruption for the 13-14 school year. But as I watch the Moody work, I mean, it's kind of important that we have a sense of whether or not this is something we are seriously going to consider. Because if you look at, what we learned, like when we went to urban prep, they worked very hard to recruit strong role models as teachers for the boys' school. Just really thoughtful. Now, maybe at Ann Richards, that wasn't exactly the same thinking, but we're seeing for minority boys that it becomes particularly important, especially given the percent of kids that are coming from single-parent households. And so how do we do that? How do we do that in a thoughtful way? How do we budget for it? How do we recruit for it? And become very deliberate in some of our decision-making early on so that we have the best chances of really having the right lift. And what we're trying to do is work it as close to the existing budget and expenditures that we spend for a middle school design without a big lift from a multi-million-dollar grant. So I think for this one, we clearly will need more time to be sure that we work all through that with a tighter budget.
Other questions, Ms. Torres?
If there's one thing that I think I've had reinforced while being on the board, is the fact that there is no one single model that fits every community in this district, and that we have to be open to, if we're going to save every child, then we have to be open to having every creative opportunity to use the right model that fits for a particular child. And we have Garza, and I'm sure when people first, I wasn't here, so I don't know, but I'm sure when people first said, Garza, why are we doing that? Troubled kids, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality of it is, they're not troubled kids. They're kids that are struggling in situations that they need help. And sometimes those, the way we need to help them is different than the way a child that is struggling in a situation that doesn't need the standard help. And so for me, this is about us trying to find one more way of helping some students that that come to the table to us in a way that need a different type of assistance. And if we think this will work for kids in this situation, then I'm all for it. I want to try it. We've got 113 campuses. If we made every one of them exactly the same because of equity or whatever we wanted to call it, we'd have a lot of kids failing because they just wouldn't work. And I think one of the strengths of this district is to take some bold action, try some things that are different, because with 87,000 students, you can almost try a lot of different things if you really recognize that the standard model isn't going to work for everyone. So I certainly know Ms. Bradley. I know she's done her homework on this, and if she thinks that this is the model that's the best for these kids at these two schools in this attendance zone, and I agree with Ms. Moya. I don't like the creaming off the top. I'm not sure that really proves a whole lot. I think we need to address communities and strengthen communities and help communities with schools that are right for them, so they can walk to school, so they can have something that they're proud of, so they can have something that they want to succeed. And so I'm supportive of certainly trying to get it started sooner, because I do think some of these things need to be done slowly and methodically. And the sooner we can begin that process, I think the greater the chances of success will be. So to the extent that, once again, it falls out of the standard AAFR process, if we do it a little bit earlier, I certainly don't have a problem with that, and I would certainly endorse this. I want to mention one other thing, because I don't want to sort of give away something that's going to be presented to this board in a little bit, but it has to do with risky behaviors. I had a presentation on risky behaviors, and if the one thing that was my takeaway from risky behaviors is that kids with risky behaviors always end up being the poorest performing kids. And so sometimes, in order to address those risky behaviors, you have to take some bold action. So we're going to be asked to take some bold action with regard to health at some point in the future, but I ask you to remember that, because I saw some slides in here that are precursors to what we're going to be asked to think about, to do, and take some bold action. But it didn't dawn on me until we looked at the data, and our schools that have the riskier behaviors are the ones where our students are struggling the most academically. So if we can address those risky behaviors in some way, minimize them, then I think the academic performance in those schools will turn around.
Mr. Schneider, sorry.
Sorry. Just so I'm clear, we're talking about turning Pierce and Garza into, excuse me, I'm sorry, I meant Garcia, into single-gender schools. Is that correct? One would be one, the other would be something else.
Yes.
Okay, for the entire.
One would be male or female. Yes.
Yeah. I'm not going to go on from there. The couple of things that I'm concerned about with, I mean, if you want to put this through the process, I mean, that's fine. But I didn't see anything on delta cost of what it's going to do to drive the budget over either this year or the coming years. I am concerned, Pierce in particular has gone through a lot of turmoil, a lot of change, and we're talking about doing yet something else again to it. And if we do this on the agenda that's been proposed, there would be a meeting next Monday night where we would give direction to go forward with at least exploring further the changes, with the probability being that they would be implemented at some point in time. But the thing that concerns me most, and Ms. Bradley, I really don't mean this as a criticism, or you, Ms. Moya, either, but I don't hear why this is the solution. I mean, why is it better to do this over better to do something like bringing KIPP in? I mean, Ms. Bradley, you talked about all the things that they have to do, the standardized dressing, some of the increased rigor, some of the things that were done to the kids. Ms. Moya, you talked about the dress code and how it made an impact and everything. Those are all things that folks like KIPP do every day. So why is it better to do this rather than to do something like bringing in a good, reputable charter to do some of the things that they want to do? And I don't really see the answer. I mean, with regard to the single gender issue, I mean, I'm really torn. There's a lot that says, to me at least, it's not real well scientifically backed. There's very good examples of success as well, too, in other places. My wife came from the background where she went to a single gender school all the way through high school. And, I've talked to her about it and, it makes sense to her. But that question of, at some point, they're not in a single gender school anymore and they've got to deal with everything else that goes on outside in the real world, still is going to come up. So I, for one, would just like to see, why is it this? Why not something else instead?
Sure. Mr. President, trustees of the board, trustee Schneider. Oh, did you want to answer? Go ahead. Well, you can go ahead. Did you say you were going to answer? I didn't hear that. I'm sorry. Oh, okay. This is from the administration's perspective, so I'm sure Ms. Bradley will weigh in from her perspective too. But for us, I mean, the perspective is has a lot to do with fair enough. Yes, there are multiple ways we could go about serving these particular schools or any school in AISD. So there's no doubt about that. And given the track record of our district, we have tried different things to improve the performance of chronically low-performing schools. Now, every district, every school has its own set of circumstances. But and being new to Austin, I mean, yes, it's 3 years, but this is a big city with a lot to learn. The more I've learned about the neighborhoods that surround these two schools, particularly in the Garcia area, and things that our kids, and Mr. Torres just stepped out, but that's why we did the slide on risky behaviors. A lot of the exposure that our young men are getting to drugs and violence, and the sense that, the way they find home and brotherhood is tied more to gangs and the criminal justice system. When we looked at just our data, that's data in general, but in our data in that area, it's pretty sobering, of which we have presented before, but our feedback from the community is that that's not what they want to focus on. They want to focus on solutions to support the kids. They don't want us to constantly bring back like all the negative things that we've been able to collect in our data points. But by and large, from my professional opinion and looking at what's happening in the lives of our children inside and outside of the school, that these communities may be better served, not just with any general design, but in a design that helps them build support and family and connectedness in a deeper way to their teachers, to other adults in their lives, but also to their classmates, while they're at a very vulnerable grade level, which is adolescence at the middle school level. We talked in the presentation, some of the challenges as it relates to that are highlighted for programmatic purposes. But we really, and we understand that they're going to be coming out of mostly elementary schools that are co-ed, going back into two high schools that are co-ed. But that it is possible that these two schools and these kids can be stronger with an opportunity to really do more focused efforts around character building and leadership and, like I said, brotherhood and sisterhood in ways that probably aren't defined traditionally in single-sex schools. I also had the opportunity to participate in a single-sex school at the college level, and I suspect that's very different to what we're building here. But it is, it's not. I don't think it's about single gender for single gender's sake by any stretch of the imagination. It is bigger than or part of. Yes, there's a strong curriculum and good leaders and good teachers, but there's something else that happens that's bigger than us as a school system to our kids when they're outside of school. And I think they would be served well to have a place that brings to life the concept of family and support and brother and sisterhood to help them avoid those risky behaviors that are just killing our Latino and African American kids. The boys are already, basically coming into those middle schools with criminal records. I mean, they're getting them in middle school. The girls, are they're being exposed to things like being pregnant. We saw that the pregnancy rate among girls were twice the rate of other middle schools in the district. And of course, this is all like, things that we're getting from our health department, our health office here in AISD, and some of the self-reporting that we're getting from students. But when we looked at all those things, I mean, we really want to take the opportunity to turn their lives around, early in adolescence, but certainly before they get off to high school, because even at that age, it is really hard to change the lives of kids when they're coming up through the system sideways and all across our schools with gaps. And if it was just about academics, maybe we could just do that. We could just pick a strong academic program. But when we went to Chicago, I remember at the Urban Prep School, the founder was saying so much about how that's how they were forced to design their program. They were told they had to have a super high rigorous curriculum that looked like this, that, and the other before they would be accepted as a school within the Chicago Public Schools. But then the kids they got were lost. They couldn't even do the program. And they had to literally rewrite everything to serve the kids. And I guess what we're kind of putting out there is that we want a little bit of a head start to really spend time with those families and kids, and before we call out all the details, that we know them well enough so we've built the curriculum and the design to really support the kids that we're going to have. Not the kids that we want them to be, but like understand where the kids are that we have and take that time period, those 3 years, and really get them to the rigor they need to have before they go into high school. So I look at what's happening outside the communities and what's happening to our kids, and I know that what we're offering, just saying, we're having a comprehensive traditional design for these kids is not enough. And I think our performance for the last, 20 years in those two schools is enough to say, we need to bring them as close to us like they are our own children and put them in a tight family with us as much as possible to help them deal with things like gang activities, substance abuse, pregnancy rates, alcohol, weapons, and really work all that external stuff as much out of their lives as possible and replace it with, the skills and tools they need to be strong individuals, but also academically strong as well. But I'm sure, and there have been a lot of people that have recommended other things, like not focusing, thank goodness, I've heard many different designs. But I think we need a different environment for our kids in that area that will help us deal with the things that they're facing externally as well.
I agree with quite a few of the things that Dr. Starfin said. I guess you would have to be familiar with both communities and don't want everyone to think that everybody in the community is destitute, because it's a type of a mixed income community. So you have kids from family that are middle class, as well as you have kids from families that are not. You have kids that are coming into the school that are being raised by their grandmother, their aunt, friends, caretakers. And you have some that have a two-parent household. You have some that have a single-parent household. I think my issue is that we know we have certain behaviors, not with all kids, but with some. I'm afraid for the some, because the some are the ones that are going into our schools and our high schools with probation officers. The some are the ones that are going into our middle schools and our high schools with babies. And as much as we want to talk about KIP does not address those issues. When KIP has those issues, those kids come back to us. So we're talking about keeping those kids and actually looking at our boys and putting a staff in that school, at least what I'm hoping, and not along with curriculum, but staff in the school so that our boys can see the pathway on how to become men, and how our boys can see how education is very valuable, and that it can, Rudy Montoya used to say it was an equalizer. It is the way that you can change your situation or your circumstance and know that it may look this way today, but if you are motivated and you work hard, it does not have to look that way tomorrow. And to give our kids an opportunity to see something outside of their zip code and their area code, outside of their street. I believe that I just I can't think of anything else, in my opinion, that could be more valuable than this model. I cannot see KIP. I cannot see YES. I can't see beyond these two models. Oh, and if you would get the NACOA, it's a weekly magazine, and there's an article in it that I think is written by Dr. Jawanza Kanjufu, who has been in this district several times, and he is speaking on this issue, especially on the poor graduation rate as it relates to African American. And I know he's a big supporter of single-gender schools, especially as it relates to boys of color, so.
And you asked about cost, and we have some preliminary cost in the agenda item itself. I mean, not the agenda item, one of the attachments. And part of what we want to be able to do is, again, take all of this, work with the community, make sure that we are really getting a good data and information about kids that are coming, spend time with them, even over the summer and into the fall. We really know who the kids and families are, and start doing the right kinds of program assessments so that we understand where the detailed costs are, so that when you go into this budget cycle, there are no surprise or hidden cost. You can see in the original design, we're really using the existing budget estimates of running a middle school, but there were some other one-time startup costs that would be involved in making something like this happen. But that includes some facility cost as well, just bathrooms and things of that sort. But we've started a short list of that, and then, we'll have to go back and get a read on all those families and make sure that we understand what the transportation costs might look like if, people, choose or don't want to go to the single-sex designs. Which might be like another $350,000, just not sure until we really count out everything and see how many routes and things that we would have to run. But there is a beginning budget estimation there.
I would suspect it's going to, in general, cost you more to operate a school like this than it is to operate the standard middle school, just because of the kind of people that. Right.
But I will,
Is that correct?
fair enough. I mean, I don't know, but we will, be able to answer that. and Paul and others are taking notes too, but I wrote that down to, be sure that we look at, everything from Ann Richards to, even if it's not single sex, but we have program designs that we do that might be a little more comparable to what we're talking about, and, see, what that looks like, to be sure that, y'all understand what kind of potential investment or extra cost that might be.
Yeah, I mean, the cost is one issue, but, the two big ones for me is, like I say, I'm just not convinced that this is the thing to do versus something else. I mean, KIPP, I think, imposes both some of the academic rigor and behavioral rigor that has been discussed in general. And, I'm not wed to KIPP in any way, shape, or form. I mean, there may be other better options out there that I just don't know about. And, are one of those better to do than this? I don't know. But the other factor that is a big concern for me, though, is, again, getting back to doing this next week. And, the message it sends that, in all probability, this is what we're going to be doing for that school year. And while Ms. Bradley has talked to the community, and, others may have as well, as a board, I don't think that we've had any real dialogue with the community or heard from the community, other than a few isolated emails that say, this is what we want to do. And, I would strongly suspect that, given some of the background and backing that Pierce in particular had picked up after the TEA did what they did a couple of years, that, there would be individuals there that would be very concerned about taking this action at this point in time.
Ms. Bradley.
I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. It's like this. Pierce has been touched quite often, but if we look at Pierce has not been successful. And at some point, we're going to have to do something different. Now, you may think it's KIPP, but you have to look at what's best. No. Well, then if you're open to anything, then I would like for you to be open to this, because what we are looking at is, when we're looking at children of color, and especially boys of color, we are not seeing the same opportunities come to them as we see come in other avenues. So we have to see something different, and it is educating boys not to have them sit in a seat and sit there all day and think that they can be robots, but to develop a curriculum where they're moving around and doing things. And that does not happen in traditional middle school. Now, no, I do not want KIPP. No, I do not want yes. I would like for the community to come together. I mean, there are models throughout the United States of successful school, especially as we look at boys of color. You can look at the Eagle Academy in New York. You can look at the Chicago Urban Prep, and you can look at the research that has come out of those schools. The one thing that any one of the schools says is that you have to have the right staff. So that's first and foremost, so we know that. But it also says that when you put those kids together and you educate them, you take out the distraction, you see something change and you see something happen. You see kids who are motivated to learn. One year, the Chicago Urban Prep had one young man that I think was accepted to about 10 different colleges, and he had gotten accepted to Harvard. He was waiting for his letter to see if he would be accepted to Yale, which is where he wanted to go. And I didn't get the opportunity to ask the gentleman if he actually got in. But these boys went into that school their first year. The first cohort, 9th grade, went in with 3% of the kids being able to read on grade level. They had to develop this. So they had to develop motivated children, and they did this. So to me, this is an opportunity, as I said, to do something different and just change the face of education for what we've been doing to something that could be great.
Other questions or comments? Okay, let me weigh in if I can. Ms. Bradley.
My community know that I will never force anything down their throat. They know that, and they know that I'm going to bring them along with me every step of the way. We will vet this, and if it gets to the point where they just don't want it and they are jumping up and down and screaming, because I know that it will not be successful if I do not have them on board. But I will say right now, I do not have anybody jumping up and down screaming regardless to whatever letter you're getting from whoever, because I haven't received that. And you would think, since I am the board member, somebody would be sending me something to tell me what it is that they think. But I don't do that, and I've never been that type of board member. I never will be.
Okay, I'm just one person's opinion, but I think that there's a lot of, this is very complex, right? I mean, and when you look at a lot of these schools around the country that do this, they're choice schools, or some of them are high schools versus middle school. It's not necessarily completely apples to apples to what we're proposing here. But I'm completely persuaded that we have to do something different. And we have, one of our priorities is a rich portfolio of options. And I think the motivations for change that are being expressed are completely appropriate. The question I have is really one of timing. And you asked Ms. Barksdale about, to Dr. Christopher, about lessons learned, and I think I have a couple over the past year. And one of which is that we have to have a very, from a fiduciary standpoint, just in general, when we committed to an AAFR process last year, that was a December timeframe, and I'm okay moving it up. But I think to do that, we need to make sure that when the administration's ready to come forth with a recommendation that has a business case with analysis, budget implications, including the pros and cons, the human capital, the implementation plan, what support resources is going to be. And there's some things about this particular design that we need to make sure we understand. You know, what are the protocols? What are the agreements? How's it going to work? And what are the alternatives for kids that choose not to go here? Where is that? You know, because we don't know. And if I look at the surveys, you know, it's a mix. There's a lot of maybes and there's some no's of kids that choose not to go there. And 40%, so if a lot of these people choose not to go there, what's the opt-out provision? Where would they go? Well, we had an opt-out transfer provision, whatever it looks like. We just went through another school. So, Ms. Moyer, you can use whatever word you would prefer to use, but this is an assignment. And most of these schools around the country are not attendance zone driven assignment, you must go here. They are choice schools. But I'm persuaded that this is a compelling model for our district, but we have to provide options for people that choose not to go here. When maybe they transfer out, but where do they transfer to? What are those options? And what do they need to know, and when do they need to know it? And I agree that it would be helpful to get started. The second thing is this idea of community engagement process. That I do think we have to make sure that we've done in a fair, thorough community engagement process. So if the intent is to get a nod to move forward, then I'm okay giving the nod to move forward. But I think I'm particularly reluctant, like next week, to say we're doing this thing, and now we'll come back if it changes. I think we need to say, yes, this is worth pursuing. Yes, we'll do it, and maybe look to an action in August. But there needs to be some level of community engagement that we can all say that we did it thorough and we've gone out and let the community know this is the recommendation. Because I don't think you've gone out there yet to the public with this is what we're planning on recommending. You've gone out there to seek input, but I think they need to understand this is what you're recommending, and then have opportunities for input. No, I'm actually talking about her. We've got this as an option, but I don't think we've gone out and said this is the recommendation of the administration. And I'd be concerned if we said this was the administrative recommendation that was coming forth to the superintendent next week, and the only chance that people have to the input is the citizens' communication next week at the board meeting. And I think that would appear, given the lesson learned, is too short a time frame. But I'm open to say in August, September, if we can put the business case together, we can make sure the public understands this is the recommendation coming from you, supported by Mr. Bradley, and that the community's had a chance to weigh in, and they understand that we're open to the input and have the hearings, and that we are acknowledging that we're taking an exception to our previously approved facility master planning process, AAFRs, that we're going to accelerate this because of the importance of the implementation, and that we need to get the human capital and the resource supports and the facility things all lined up, knowing that there still may be some approval points downstream. So I guess for me, if it's coming back to say you're asking for, is this worth pursuing further? Absolutely. Do you want a nod to say yes, go out there to the community? I mean, I'm comfortable doing that. But I personally am not going to be comfortable saying Monday, I'm ready to vote for this, because I think unless you can just have a lot of stuff that I haven't seen yet ready to go for Monday. And I appreciate what Ms. Bradley said about the community not going forward. But I think my caution would be that we don't authorize this without having done what you're saying, that we'll get some chances to let the community work on it, and you can start working in parallel. But I think the authorization, at least from my perspective, the board needs to make sure that we've followed the process, because the lessons learned for the last couple of years is fiduciary duty, community engagement, following what we've approved, and then if we acknowledge that we're going to do something different, that we all come together and say, yes, we're willing to accelerate the time frame. But I think, again, the motivation for this is appropriate, and I think something different's got to happen. And I'm open, if someone's got some better ideas, let's do it. I just don't know what they are, but I just want to make sure that we've done our due diligence in an appropriate way. So whenever you're ready to come forth, at least for me, for all of the business case with all the analysis and the community engagement and enough opportunities for input with people knowing that's where you're recommending, because we knew last fall, people knew where the recommendation was going. We had lots of opportunities for input. I don't think we'll be ready for that Monday, but I can see this being ready in August and September, if everybody's comfortable with that. Ms. Barksdale, Ms. Bradley.
I think when I started speaking, I said that what I would have liked to have seen, because this conversation has been going on for a while, and I have been meeting with community for a while. I do not believe that Monday would be the right time to do it either. I would like to have a town hall meeting and ask some individuals in the community to help me with that. And that could probably take place in July while we're out. So, no, I do not believe that Monday would be the best time to do it. I do not. But I do not want to wait too late, because the one thing that we do, and we're very good at, and I'm just going to be blunt, we will wait to start hiring people in January, and then all of a sudden we want to start throwing together a design for a program and then implement it when school starts, and wonder why it's not successful, because we do not take the time to plan out anything. And I said once before, when we had talked about this being possibly in 11-12, that I wasn't so much concerned when it was implemented, but I was concerned with the fact that it would be implemented well. So we moved it to what, 13, 14? So I think that we've had ample time, more than enough ample time. Because if failure is what we sit on and we're comfortable with that, then we do nothing. But if we're sick of failure, then we need to do something. So I can wait to August. I'm not going to tell you I want to wait to September, but I can wait to August, because I am sick and tired of failure, and we need to do something different. And our community cannot continue to complain about what we haven't done, because at some point the solution has to be not to continue to stay in the past, but to move on to the future and do something different for kids. And so this is just a game changer for me.
Thank you. Just to add to that list about lessons learned, I think that we shouldn't leave ourselves open to a battle of the white papers. Maybe the administration can put together for us just a top line, or even a more in-depth look at research, academic outcome research to support the models.
Okay, any other comments on this item? So if you want to give us an update at the BW, I don't know that we need to bring this back, given what's been said at the very end here on the agenda next week, but I think we can look at August, and we need to look at the board calendar to make sure that there's time to discuss it and find out where you stand, and schedule meetings as necessary to update the board and figure out where we need to go.
And we have a calendar committee meeting scheduled this month, so we'll add that to our list Thursday. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, anything else, folks? Thank you all. A lot of heavy lifting today. So it's 10:15. We are adjourned.